Hi folks, just before the show starts there, sadly there was a bit of problem the odd time where the sound sort of went down for some reason, probably just the headphones or whatever it was. Anyways, and sort of stuff like that. So the show will start there in a second, but anyways, we're going to cover a gigantic amount of crazy sorts of stuff here, and as usual, we always have some comedy here. Like we're just thinking here with these professors here with these proof of ancient giants and stuff like this. Like if this guy hadn't been sitting there, you know, and. I am the professor, and these giants did not exist. Quick, hide them all, throw them out, Smithsonian. Plus, how can I teach classes and students that I am the genius that I am, especially after they see these giants' brains is much larger than mine or the Academy's. I know this guy belonged to ancient Mesa. Yeah, I know he did. He belonged to ancient Mesa. I know he had to belong to Mensa. He pisses me off, for I do not even belong to modern Mensa. I know what I will do. I will write theory that he was an ape man with a big brain and big equipment, but nothing in his mind, all in his loins, which pisses me off too. Why cannot today we be born like that? He is so machismo, so big, so virile. Jawohl, that is the answer. That is what I will do. And I know what I will call him. I will call him Mega Neanderthal Man. And they will believe that one, these kids, the class will be so lost thinking of these giant's loins. They won't pay attention to anything else and just believe me. They will worship their professor. So we're going to cover a lot of crazy stuff about the beliefs of different sort of scientific communities out there, about all kinds of stuff. And also about these bizarre sort of, they're not actually Bigfoot, but they're wild people that could fit into this Bigfoot phenomena. And we're going to cover everything from the, oh God, that one's always a hard one for me to pronounce, to my old buddy, the Enkidu frost giants, the mink, the ulok, and all the gang in between. And it counts from papers to journals of wild people, and a little bit of humor here and there. There's a little bit adult-like, but nothing like really massively sort of thing. So anyways, viewer discretion is advised, because some of the topics are about like mysterious disappearances and weird stuff, and yeah, you know, it could be upsetting to weaker sort of stomachs and stuff. But anyways, stay tuned. And and also one other thing too, there we're going to cover like a lot of different giant wild people. It's over 6 hours of this sort of stuff. So anyways, hopefully you enjoy it. Bye for now. Welcome to the Cryptozoology Show with your host, the Cryptozoologist. And this episode, we're going to have an historical look at Sasquatch and the evidence of its existence. Covering everything from thousands of year-old reports to today, and the evidence showing giant hairy people have been reported or captured since ancient times and still likely still exist. From giants found matching Sasquatch to footprints, eyewitness accounts, and different take on this thing by showing even science that already we do have evidence showing and proving that giant hairy people did exist, and people seem to not understand that this is not debatable and actually a fact. And one is the same as the other, and they are what we call Sasquatch. And basically, the idea is since I've been a kid in many of these sort of stories and stuff like this, I researched early things from Ivan Sanderson and some of his sort of early books, and different all kinds of the ones over the ages. where a lot of the reports you get from certain countries, Europe and different ones like that, some of these people had clubs. We had this down here even in Ottawa in a cave with giant tomahawks and stuff like this, and the guy's this 8-foot hairy monster and these kinds of things. So basically the problem is that we have these two sort of factions out there where people they believe that Bigfoot is a great ape, either a Gigantopithecus or some unknown sort of great ape. Then you have other people that are sort of like the people that believe that Bigfoot is actually an ancient man. What I believe is actually both sort of things exist, including possibly a third sort of variety of this. But no matter what, Sasquatch, yes, exists. Whatever the problem is that these two groups, this is very sort of, it's a rough sort of subject in some ways, because you have this one group that everybody, the Bubba guy out there, he's got his big bazooka, he wants to blast Bigfoot and prove to the world that Bigfoot's real, and he's a big giant hairy monkey man. Then you have the other people that do not want to kill one of these under any circumstances and stuff like this, and fully believe they're human-like. And so they think that they'd be actually murdering a human. But what I'm proposing to you is that both of these sort of things actually exist, and at least bare minimum, and probably at least several other varieties of them. But not only that, the skeletal and everything evidence is already here for these sort of stuff. So to me, Bigfoot isn't even debatable. By the time that I finish the show, you're going to see that it's actually, no matter what, there is and was in very even recent times that we can prove up until at least the 1800s, where there was giant humans that were full of hair, that lived in caves, that came out and ate people and raped them. We're going to cover this from ancient times to today, where actually these skeletons have been found. The stories are proven. There is no debate that a giant, hairy, sort of man-like creature lived in a cave. What the problem is that nobody's mixing these two together, and the Sasquatch group don't analyze this as evidence because they say that they found giant humans in a cave. And so people have this sort of weirdness to them where they can't handle the fact that really it doesn't matter whether the guy's a human or a great ape or an unknown gray ape or whatever the scenarios or both or these kinds of stuff. It doesn't matter. The point is that the stories for thousands of years is very the same. That local cave systems have some kind of wild-like monster that lives in them, be it little trolls. In some areas, people are smaller. In other areas, they're bigger, and different sort of variations to this, and this sort of stuff. So the thing is that since ancient times, there has been hairy people. There is no doubt about this. There has been also giants or skeletons all over the place still that we can actually analyze to this day and look upon, and we can clearly see that they exist and are not old, and so therefore it is not debatable that some kind of overly large human-like sort of a person to animal existed in a cave. They were completely covered with hair, and they match all the normal descriptions of what people see. And so the bottom line with this is by the time that we get through this and sort of stuff like this, you'll see that even emperors sometimes were in control of thousands of them. Some were captured and made to use as sort of workers and all kinds of stuff like this. These are, we're going to discuss about Xana. She's proven the skeletons of her there, all this kind of stuff. She was a wild Neanderthalish, sort of ancient, sort of human hairy lady. And this sort of stuff like this. The thing is that these native stories that we're going to cover is that everybody likes the imaginary sort of Harry and the Hendersons version of the Bigfoot. And yes, there is Bigfoot out there that are like this. They're going to be probably friendly, some of them. Some of them are probably just like any humans or apes. Some apes are friendly. Others are not, and will kill you. And it's the exact same thing with this is going to occur. So we're going to cover a huge amount of stuff about this. For the most skeptical people on Earth, by the time that I'm finished with you, from the native ancient accounts, here, like Daraz here, with this fascinating, sort of interesting piece there with the ancient natives totem pole sadly mixing in with white man's humanity here, and the great thunderbird alien gods of the sky coming down and this sort of stuff. But basically what this art piece I guess was trying to sort of state is that it's an awful that the sort of outside we're being affected by sort of like unknown forces, possibly from the skies and all kinds of stuff, and that also human other bad encroachment that has went on these other civilizations, and you can see the two are sort of at a standstill here, and yet they're both beside each other, sort of a thing, right? And the sort of stuff like that. So I mean. Ancient people for thousands of years here of different tribes, pretty well all across the board, tell you of the same wild cannibalistic men that live in the sort of the cave systems and stuff like that. So we'll cover everything from them to all kinds of stuff like this, and a massive amount of things, everything from hair samples to DNA to all kinds of stuff, and show you sort of at the end that for sure at least, yes, some giants that are hairy exist, or at least get proven up until very recent times, and therefore, no matter what, these stories actually do have basis that people really have seen giant hairy wild people, or apes, or both, in the forest, and they actually are telling the truth. So we'll continue on with this, and but first, as usual, we always got to have some laughs here. So even though this is going to be a very serious subject and sort of stuff like this, so and the skeptics might not like some of this stuff, but these are all proven facts and sort of stuff like this that we're going to go through. But we always have to get in our readers here and different viewers and stuff. And Jean-Guy sent here another fascinating one. So. Sasquatch is loved by all, even by the PM. This supposed photo of Trudeau's half-man, 8 Poutine warriors, of all the proofs and stuff there. Here's his personal bodyguard, the Brutus, and he's catching one of these Trudeauian imposters. And you can clearly see it looks like Trudeau there, and he's picking him up and sort of stuff like this. So the theory is that Junkie believes these aliens are cloning Trudeau's, and they're everywhere. And Trudeau likes this because there's so many people that get peeved off at him that the more fake Trudeaus are out there, then likely the terrorist guy or somebody that doesn't like Trudeau will get one of their clones instead of him, right? So Junkie might be right about that, because I mean, this guy certainly does look like a Trudeau, and they're terrified. You see them everywhere in the Rideau Center and all over the place and stuff like this, and I mean, there's just way too many of them. So there's going to be some truth to this, but apparently the Brutus there, he made him non-denominational. That way he can't be bribed by any sort of, the Law Gang or anybody else that want to sneak in and stuff like this. So he's non-denominational. And so he caught this sort of cloning fan here that was trying to sneak into a secret cave entrance that Sergio Gubbio, his reported secret hairstylist, will sneak in sometimes, or also to deliver him supposedly a pot or Labatt 50 when needed, right? So this is a picture of here at the cave entrance here, hidden in behind the Parliament buildings. It's like the Bat Cave, and this Trudeau clone here is in big trouble. Look who it is. So, is our politicians and defense using these ape warriors for nefarious means, or lullifying them, possibly some of them? And if so, who are they mating them with? Which would be another sort of question. But anyway, Jean-Guy sent in this again there, so pretty entertaining as usual. So we'll keep this sort of drama going about these sightings behind the Parliament buildings. And is that really Trudeau or one of his clones, or what's really going on here? But anyway, so we'll continue on and now get serious with the real serious life of our good friend the Sasquatch. So wild men have been depicted for thousands of years. Art from Indian art, such as the Enkidu. He was this, 10, 11 foot sort of buddy there of Gilgamesh's and Gilgamesh tales of Gilgamesh. And if you actually see depictions of him, 100% fits every sort of Sasquatchian sort of tale of today, right? But here's some of these are historic artworks and stuff where in castles and different things like that, they actually had these people that would do artworks when battles were occurring, so that they could show the sort of king and whatever was going on and stuff like this. And this is this one here was not actually one of the people witnessing this. This guy made this after as a tapestry sort of about this event. But there's an actual real painting while this guy was doing this, showing these wild men, and they didn't actually look like what's in the depiction here. They actually looked fully like a Bigfoot, and he even emphasizes their feet, because this guy was actually watching this in this battle at this Moor Castle. And these 8 men were peeved off. Apparently there was this unicorn that supposedly had been killed right around this time. And somehow this upset these sort of giant hairy wild people. And they came out, and this guy actually has the most astonishing depiction. I mean, you would swear to God you're looking at a typical Sasquatch of today, right? He emphasizes the feet, they're fully covered hair, they got pointed heads, the whole, everything, the length of the arms are correct and stuff. And even the leader actually has this sort of unicorn-like horn in his hand, which again, because these guys were killed, if they reported inaccuracies to their kingdom, these guys, this was their job, and they were actually would be executed if anything was wrong. This was very vital to these, so these guys took this job serious. So that friggin' Bigfoot guy had a unicorn hand and a horn in his hand. He really did have one in his hand. And yes, as I showed you in other shows, yes, unicorns probably in all likelihood existed, or at least something like that had these sort of horns to them. But this depiction here, even though it's a sort of like a sewn-in tapestry, this was an actual based on a real story of this castle being attacked, and there's been several of these castles being attacked by wild ape people, upset about stuff, and they always use the same kind of stuff. They use giant boulders and things that will hurl, just like a story we'll go about later on in Ape Canyon and stuff like this. So not only am I going to show you that since ancient time, these people, wild people / Bigfoot sort of stuff, has been doing these kinds of behaviors. They do the same behaviors worldwide. It doesn't matter where it is, because if they're wild human-like, well, then, of course, this can occur worldwide. Humans can live in any sort of environments, so these kinds of stuff. And so it's going to be a very interesting sort of a show here. Here are hundreds of year-old depictions of them. They were so well known at one time that people would dress up in shindigs in early times. And but if you look at the basis of how these things occurred, they always mention that there used to be like cave wild people that they would the kingdom controlled or had battles with, or different stuff like this. And all of them would report the same kind of stuff like this, that they'd either live in caves or in the deep, thick forest. They were unapproachable. Most of them could never speak any sort of a language or stuff like this. Would squeak and make sort of like screeching like sounds and weird things like that. They were always either very muscular for their either small or bigger sizes to them. There's events of everything from children's size to giant ogre monsters, and in every kind of caving system worldwide, and sort of forests and stuff like this. Now, there's been different forms of these sort of wild men, everything from lichens. There's ancient manuscripts. Certainly, I don't have a picture of one yet here, but there's quite a few ancient old paintings and drawings you can find of these lichen people that were thrown out of villages, and the same with these ancient people. Now, a lot of people are looking at this and thinking this can be real, but this was a real supposed tribe of people that was actually being ruled by this guy and stuff like this, and he would use these warriors in battles. And these guys actually had sort of weird clothing-like sort of feet to them. And there was strange offspring, because in ancient times you had all these sort of probably plague-like things might have went on and different stuff like that, and strange births and stuff. And because the villagers were very suspicious and different things like this, any of these wolf-looking people, hairy people, people that looked any kind of bizarre to them, sometimes a bunch would be born. So what they would do is they would chuck them out, and the village would attack them sort of, or throw them out, and sort of leave them out to the wilds or the woods. And a lot of these, it's reported that they would start getting in groups and start living in local caving systems or in the forest, and would stay away from people. Of course you would. You were already throwing out your original first group of you, were thrown out because you're these furry freaks or whatever it is, right? And that you then sort of already have a mistrust of the regular sort of looking humans that you would find in a regular village. And because you're human and still maybe very intelligent, you're going to now sort of start evading them and stuff like that. And possibly over time, some of you are going to turn cannibalistic. We're going to cover this sorts of stuff and different sort of stuff. And some would get bigger or smaller depending on their environment and the sort of stuff like that, and genetics and different stuff. And because in today's time we live in a sort of like where we have a lot more medicines and all these kinds of stuff, but in ancient times, even my grandmother, I'll tell you stories later about where she's actually a witness of these sort of ape-like people being born and stuff like this, and dog-like people and things like this. So this has occurred even in our modern times in hospitals and stuff like that, except in today's time we would deal with them in a sort of a more appropriate fashion. But in ancient times, these people would consider them sort of evilistic or some cursed by the devil or all these kinds of weird stuff that they might have thought, and so they would push them out of the villages. And there's records I found all through Europe and every country you could possibly go around pretty well of these same sort of stories. And all of them identical with telling you the same sorts of stuff of their behaviors and the sort of stuff like that. Here's more centuries old wild men there. You can see them all depicted through Europe and the white furry. They always show them the same. Now, some you can tell the person was actually looking at either some kind of real specimen or was familiar with the specimen and seen what one would look like. And then others, they would make them sort of wild-like, but then put like more of a typical man's-like face or lady's face on them and stuff like that, like in this sort of depiction. And of course, here you have, like, you notice the guy does the dragon a little bit sort of better than that sort of stuff, because dragons sort of like were a lot more even sort of no one around by locals sort of believed in sort of thing. But you can see here that they describe them quite well, but you can tell that this person specifically was not really looking at a wild person. He's just showing you an artwork of at the time when they talk about these wild people, they decided to do that. And because, I mean, if he actually had saw one, it's not likely that this wild person's face would be clear like that and these kinds of stuff like that. So, and their feet is more human-like. You can clearly see that and that sort of stuff like that. But these depictions are all over the place like this, completely telling you stories of them being captured and or that they were thrown out of villages because they were these big furry freaks. And there's ones in modern times that were actually found in forests, giant hairy people. There was and both of them were claimed to have been the children of wild men that had raped the women. And we actually have physical evidence where there's photographs of these people, they were approached, and all kinds of stuff like that, and these kinds of stuff. So it's 100% fact that, yes, some kind of hairy, sort of giant-like people have existed throughout our centuries and stuff like this. And the problem is, again, is that the certain Bigfoot crowd does not like that sort of answer, and the other sort of crowd can't believe that wild men could evade you so much easily like that and this kind of weird stuff. So it's not a popular sort of thing no matter who you go across the board, because they sort of, the one crowd wants Bigfoot to be this wonderful little vegetarian living in the woods and saying hi to people and being all shy and stuff. And then the other sort of crowd sort of believe that he's a wild human, but they also still don't want to know that he's cannibalistic and all this kinds of stuff like this. But the natives and everybody from every culture, from Europe all over, the same story: stay away from the caves, the boogeyman kind of guy's going to get you, whether he's an ogre, a troll, and different ones. And because, just like humans, you're going to have different varieties, sizes, and stuff. As for instance, let's say some of these hairy children were born in one village and they happen to also have dwarfism, right? They would have went out, and let's say they now are forced out in the cave, and let's say, I don't know, 8 or 10 of them were born where they all had this weird sort of problem, some genetic thing that some lady or the parent, the father had carried and somehow passed it on to these sort of things. So now you got a little group out there, they're living in a local cave nearby. Well, just like any other humans, just because the guy's furry or not, or she's furry or not, doesn't mean they might not have some kind of sexual interest out there, or the wanting of procreating and these kinds of stuff like that. So, of course, since they've been already thrown out of the village and had pies thrown at them, or whatever the case, as they chucked them out of town, charred and feathered them, or whatever, well, then this first group in a spot would probably do stuff like that. They would sneak down and grab some sort of like bait or a pillow or whatever it is and try and do this sort of thing. And then they would then, the wild people that would be born, they're not going to know there's a village far away. The wifey poo that's been captured, she can't say anything because he doesn't understand her, he just grunts, and so she can't sort of like have a conversation, explain to him he's doing wrong behavior, blah, 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 blah. And so the children are getting raised like ape-manish sort of thing like this. And yes, they might have taken now some of her stuff, but maybe sometimes when taking some of these females, the lady had it in her to pass a gene of great big height and width, because, I mean, there's humans, again, have proven in modern times over 8 feet tall. So the same thing could very feasibly occur, that some of them that would have been born might have became like even bigger monsters, smaller monsters, and they might carry this sort of genetic sort of thing with them, and sort of stuff like this, and continue living in caves and things like this until humanity has approached them too much, they've taken away, or the village moves and there's no more food supply and weird stuff like this, or if the group gets too big, then they sort of, some of the wild men are kicked out and ladies, and they move to a new area. Over thousands of years, let's say after this flood-like thing, let's say that some wild-like people did survive after the flood, in different caving systems, and this is very possible. Some caves can be trapped where they can be underwater, but have all kinds of oxygen in them and stuff. So what if this was feasible, that some wild-like people, some happen to be more hairy than the next, and eventually, sort of over time, they become sort of quite different, and some of them living up in colder climates and different higher elevations and stuff, would maybe become bigger or smaller or whatever to fit this sort of terrain and the natural enemies that we have around them. Just like humans do in different parts and countries, there's groups of giant humans that certain tribes are extremely tall on average and the same sort of stuff. So all you need is, because a human can live 50, 100 years or more sort of thing, is each time one of these little groups, at first in ancient thousands of years ago, the first little groups that were pushed out in different villages and different areas around the world, they would only need a small amount of sort of to continue on a wild man-like thing, and that's why in some areas they were more common than others, depending on how many sort of survived from local stuff with the sicknesses and all kinds of weird things like this, right? Now here, this one's a lot more sort of better depiction a little bit, where more likely the guy still makes the human-like face a little bit, but he's very much more like our typical Sasquatch sort of thing, where a lot more muscular, wider, and they sort of and this sort of stuff like that, right? So you see here another sort of these ancient depictions, and the same thing you can see here. Different. There was like a green man and these different ones, right? But all of this stuff, if you look back in ancient history through it, all of them had the origins. A lot of skeptics have tried to say it was just a Halloween thing and all this ridiculous stuff. It had nothing to do, really, that these were things, of course, because people knew of these wild people, so they celebrated them and sort of would do these sort of weird stuff. But the origin of them, always you'll find back that it was a wild people that were thrown out of a village or were found in a cave and shot or killed or some kind of thing like that, where that's sort of the origin of the original story in the area that you'll find. Now look at this guy here. This one's hundreds of years old, and now this one here, I would suspect that this guy was a bit more basing this on some kind of factual knowledge that he had himself. Either he saw one, or that the sort of some people that described this to him to draw it gave it to him in a better fashion here. Because if you look, you see how he emphasizes the giant feet on this. And if you notice, too, how much more wider instead of our typical, like, Sasquatch prints we find today, instead of, like, human-like, where he would have drawn it in the middle there, it would have been shrunken in more and much more sort of different. But this guy emphasizes how gigantic that these wild men's feet are. So in cases like this, I suspect that some of them had a bit more knowledge on the subject and might have either seen one or some kind of thing like that, where at least they were more familiar with what they really look like. Here you can see races like in ancient maps here in Patagonia and stuff like this. But now, again, the same thing. You see them as very furry, hairy, Bigfoot-like people, but they're using primitive sort of weapons and stuff like this. So I'm going to go on about this, that even orangutans have been known to do this, and all kinds of... So it doesn't matter at the end of the day whether there's great apes and wild humans that are both living in our cave systems. Both have the ability to actually use primitive-like weapons, and both certainly intelligent enough to evade us and this sort of stuff, and you'll see this. I mean, these are warning you in Patagonian maps and stuff like this of the giants of Patagonia and stuff like this, and all these kinds of stuff are actually, like, there's so much of this that is mind-boggling that for sure giant humans of some sort of stuff existed, right? And here, some more sort of stuff like this, you can see that. And here's a portrait of a family member of one of these sort of hairy Bigfoot people. Now, can you imagine, in ancient times, you'd be these villagers and stuff like this, right? And this overgrowth of hair syndrome, you would look at somebody like this and say, oh my God, he's like from the devil or something, or he was like let's say because he didn't have apes, some of them in different areas, they might have thought he was like a dog-like person or some kind of weird thing that they would relegate to being furry or like this, some kind of wild human. Sort of stuff like this. These people were cultured and kept these people and raised them properly and cultured them and sort of stuff like this, showing that obviously these hairy people have just as much as intelligence as an average person could have, or whatever, things like that. Just because they're furry doesn't mean their mind doesn't work correctly and stuff like that. So imagine, though, the villagers, if a bunch of people like this was born to somebody and you chuck them out. Well, yeah, you're going to have some inbreeding, but some of them are going to survive. They might be weird and stuff like this, but then they may then run across another wild one that was thrown out later and mate and continue on the thing, or be raping some local sort of people in the villages around there, and eventually you would have a sort of a group of them and stuff like this, and you could theoretically keep these on because, like I said, they're rare in some areas they weren't. They were quite common. So it would all depend on a lot of sort of stuff like this, of a bit of genetic luck, different things like that, what they were eating, sicknesses that would, maybe wipe out a big group of them at once quite quickly, and all kinds of different stuff like this. But these Patagonian giants, all kinds of giants around the world for sure existed, and some of them were extremely hairy and stuff like this. Now, give a load of this. This is a fascinating one. Here's this guy, this early explorer, Diaz El Castillo, okay? Now, here's what this guy says. He talks about this fascinating thing. He says, they said that their ancestors, and he's talking about the natives there, had told them that very tall men and women with huge bones had once dwelt amongst them. But because they were very bad people with wicked customs, they had fought against them and killed them. And I'm going to show you this, that natives have been telling you this, and groups, everybody from Russia to all over the world are telling you that sometimes they did actually fight with these wild sort of people out there and would kill them. Okay, so these wild people since day one have known to sort of avoid us and stuff like this, and may have had the origins of being thrown out originally in villages, but even thousands of years later, there's still sort of like the same thing has occurred where you have actually sort of like, it's possible to continue on the population of this, or to restart them again by having freaks again, of different children and stuff like this, where the locals leave them abandoned, and then they start up a new sort of thing, and this sort of stuff. So you'll see here like that this race that was living there, okay, he said that the rest of them they killed them, and some of them who had remained had died off. So they weren't able to keep their sort of gene going on, so then they fully died off. And this is made of what's occurred in many places in the U.S. and around the world, where there used to be enough of them around, but because human encroachment, pollution, who knows, like lack of maybe prey anymore, different things, now these ancient humans, or the guy couldn't find somebody to mate with, now this group in that particular area die off. It says, how big these giants had been, they brought us the leg bone of one, which was very thick and the height of an ordinary sized man. And that was a leg bone from the hip to the knee. I measured myself, he said. So can you imagine, like how huge that would be, right? And so against it, and it was tall as I am, though I am of reasonable height. So just that one little bone was the height of this sort of early explorer here. Okay? They brought other pieces of bone of the same kind, but they were all rotten and eaten away by the soil. We were all astonished by the sight of these bones and felt certain there must have been giants in the land. Okay? So, I mean, this sort of stuff is consistently across the board being reported to you from ancient times in every sort of areas. Okay, here's the Native Americans. You can see your ancient sort of depictions here, and they would make these sort of Bigfoot people sort of, and you can see how big his sort of feet like are much wider, sort of like this and this kinds of stuff like this. Leif Erikson in 900 AD mentions fighting with a race of 9-foot-plus hairy giants that smelled most intolerable, that were like cannibals. Okay, so again, this, whether they're human or ape or both, they still either both of them have the ability to use primitive-like tools, some of them, depending on the group, and yes, they for sure existed. And because we're going to show you even modern findings of this sort of stuff, where it's not disputable, there is a wild humans of some sort that is found in a cave, and they're gigantic, and they've got fur all over them, and they sort of, and this is a problem with why we're going to cover about Sasquatch hairs, why they're not reliable, sort of in a lot of ways, because of these sort of things. That people are sort of looking for a mysterious unknown creature, but it could be that he's well known to us, sort of thing, right? So here's some fascinating, this is one of the best pieces of interesting proof you can sort of get. This native tribe, okay, you can actually find, like M.K. Davis does a whole sort of show about this sort of stuff like this. If you haven't seen, he has some excellent sort of big Sasquatch-like films out there that some of them, he didn't make them, they're different ones that he just analyzes them, and we'll show you all kinds of stuff about it. He analyzes the Patterson film and different, all kinds of stuff like that. Seems like a very nice fellow. I've never personally talked with him or anything, stuff like that, but I know he's a heavy researcher and interested in this sort of stuff too. So who knows if he's seen any of my stuff or not? But it doesn't matter. But the thing is that he's sort of this sort of ancient, this tribe here, okay, that was found. These people tell you the story, this tribe, and this is the only place on earth that they've ever found this sort of thing. These were children that escaped from wild people. They said they were the offspring of giants, hairy giants that lived in the caves and would come down and rape and sometimes eat them and different weird stuff like this. Now look at these guys. It's fascinating. You see, no other native group in history is known to have any of these kinds of weird stuff, but you can clearly see that there's sort of, you're getting a mixture of both here. Where, unlike the normal hairy disease, if it was a hairy sickness like this one that you find all across Europe and other certain countries, if it was that, then you would then have them covered from head to toe with hair and looking much more Bigfootish. But instead, because these are humans that were sort of, the lady was raped, or man, or whatever the case, and somehow they procreated, the children, this shows that they have to be very similar to human or very close to us in order to have offspring. Okay, and you also see that the offspring has sort of two different sorts of variants here, where you have some of the native-like skin where there's no hair at all and sort of stuff like this, but then other sort of stuff is, parts of it is super furry and thick like a Bigfoot would be. And so these people, they're not telling you, this is not an embarrassment to them. They actually, these people are part of the tribe and this sort of stuff like that. It's not a sort of a big deal, sort of like it would have been maybe in some tribes where they would have ostracized them, but this particular group, they didn't do this. And they fully tell you that these wild people would come down and rape them sometimes, but sometimes some of them would escape and stuff like this and come back to the village and these kinds of stuff. And if they are a primitive human, some of them, well then, just like any primitive human, some might like you. So the Bigfoot raped some lady. She has this child in there. He's kept her up there. He doesn't let her escape. But maybe she, when the Bigfoot guy's out foraging, worried she was still smart enough to know that this Bigfoot guy might kill this child someday or whatever, or this kind of idea. And so she might have snuck them out or let some of them loose sometimes. So this is very feasible. And you even get these stories even from Sweden and all over the world. Like, I mean, so it doesn't matter where it is, the same exact sort of stuff like this, where you have this ogre-like guys living in caves and they come down, but you actually have physical evidence of this because there is no group in the planet that is known to have this sort of thing. And why do you call them liars when these are primitive people living way out in the middle of nowhere land? They don't have any reason to make this stuff up or any of this sort of stuff. So if they're telling you that these wild people come down and take them, they're telling you the truth probably, because we'll show later that other native groups were telling the truth. There's actually proof for it. This could be debatable. Some guy could argue that maybe there's some kind of weird genetic freaks or whatever and stuff like that. But it's certainly interesting. It's very different from any of the other known sort of ones out there. And because they're telling you this story, why sort of dispute it? I mean, it could be very true, like what they're saying, and you'll see over time that this very likely is the case. Here, even fossilized giant footprints. Now, look at this. This is different. Nobody's noticed this before. I've never seen these in Sasquatch lakes that much or any of this kinds of stuff like this. There's either people that are all into giants and they completely just conclude them as giants, or they're Bigfoot. They don't sort of mix the two together. But the thing is that you can find giant footprints of both types. There's giant footprints like this, which is Sasquatch-like. You have giant flat feet, okay? And sort of like this is a fossilized gigantic footprint there, okay? But he 100% matches our Sasquatch of today and this sort of thing. You can even see where the thing where he was bending his feet, and you can see the pores and the sort of stuff into all this sort of thing about it. When the guy was making this movement, exactly what he was doing. He was spread up with his feet, moving, propelling to the next sort of stuff. You can see where his arches and all these things sort of moved, and sort of stuff like that. And that's fascinating that, I mean, here this is not debatable because it's a fossilized thing, it's ancient, and so obviously who would be walking around with fake wooden feet back in those ancient times? For what reason would you do that, right? Like, so, right? Plus you'd never be able to get such sort of shape like this with a flat fake wooden sort of foot anyway. But, so here we'll continue on. Here's the ancient apothecary books from the 14th century and stuff like this, where they're actually mentioning, they called them bear men, wild men, and this sort of stuff like this. Now, these ridiculous skeptics, there's a bunch on the internet there, and I'm completely going to wipe out their sort of BS. They're lying to you right out, clearly 100%. If you go find this book, there's actually in the same book, they mention fully about bears and tell you how to use the parts and all this kind of stuff. But what these guys do is they lie, and they say that their conclusion is that they made a mistake. They said bear man, really it was a bear. Okay, and because the guy's saying bear man, they're saying that their conclusion was that they're describing a bear, but they're lying to you because in the same book, they describe bear in the other parts. And this is a completely different sort of a thing. He's a wild ape man. They tell you how to use his body parts and sort of stuff like this. There was an emperor, okay? This emperor in China, you can actually find still his cave, okay, that he patrolled over, and the lords of the territory, the people there that would come, there was over 3,000 of these wild people that lived in this caving system, and the cave's still there. They were said to be giants, like 7, 10, 12 feet tall sort of thing, with straw sort of colored hair, yellow colored hair, so sort of thing, and that they couldn't speak any kind of language. They just grunted and screeched, just like the rest described. They were sort of very hard to sort of like deal with, sort of stuff like this. But this guy had them as part of his people under his regime, sort of stuff like this. So these sort of stuff. So anytime you see any of these skeptics claiming to you that this was a hallucination and they were talking about a bear, they're completely outright lying to you. In the same book, they clearly show the two difference. This is one of the names, because in that culture, bear means, it just means anything big and furry. So anybody big and sort of stuff like that. So that's why they call him Bear Man, to sort of tell you that he's gigantic and big compared to like a bear, sort of like that, to give you an idea like that. So any of these skeptics are telling you that, they're dissuading a lie to you. I'm going to cover a whole bunch of stuff like this where these guys purposely do this just to keep this sort of to skeptically knock it down when they fully well know they're lying to you right out and sort of like this. But people believe these things because they don't understand all the facts. So that's why I want to cover this show a bit more thoroughly than I have in the past. Some of the newspaper articles, I'm not going to go about 5 million of them later on. I only covered a small amount in this one. But some of my other shows, I show you all kinds of evidence of that part as well. But anyways, certain ones. So here so far we can see that giant humans of hairy nature have been reported since the beginning of time pretty well, okay? Skeptics say Bigfoot never caught. This is not the case, and mentions from castles that are sent to peasants have had run-ins with them and captured them sometimes. And we'll cover some reported captures and killings and stuff like this in early times. Here was the Botany Bay giant. They had actually got this guy and brought him sort of in and did stuff with him. Now, here's a depiction of him. Right? So, I mean, he looks like a pretty sort of big, tall, furry sort of dude there. Very Sasquatchy sort of looking, the giant feet on him and stuff. And 100% about the typical size of a typical Sasquatch of today. Here's a great one where apparently this person actually that was depicting this is what this dude looked like. So as sort of a thing like this, and this is to me as sort of like a giant wild human. Again, because he has some parts to him that is seemingly a bit more sort of where he had a little bit more, so he could have even been possibly a partial wild offspring of someone that was a previous that raped some lady or something, stole her from the village, and that might have been one of the children. And this is the idea is that these sort of things have been around all over the place. They're always from caving systems or the forest, and only captured in the most rarest occurrences under very strange circumstances most of the time. So you don't get these because they have the intelligence of a human. They know to avoid you. They're gigantic, and they can easily kill you most of the time, and these kinds of stuff like that. So it's rare for us to have the ability to get in the forest without making a bunch of noise, without the creature running away from you, and this kind of stuff like this. And this is, how they sort of evade you in some ways. Now, here this giant figure found shows that describes in Arabia that giants existed in the caves. And there's a 12th century sort of a thing about that. Mentioning about that there was these giant that lived in that sort of region and stuff, and here's actually one of their fingers. Okay, so I mean, look at the size of that. I mean, absolutely astonishing here. These wild men have been described in even scientific books in different cultures, hundreds to even thousands of years ago. Different historians have once mentioned these sort of wild people, right? Again, the only reason people today doubt so much is none has been captured in modern times. A Mr. Thevet of France measured a human skeleton 11 feet 2 inches. A naturalist named Turner on the coast of Brazil saw people up to 15 feet high, a race of giants. Chinese up to even the 20th century had said some giants up to 15 feet tall still lived there. An Arabian giant named Gabara was over 9 feet. All kinds of stuff like this. So think of any of these people born with sort of this hairy sort of sickness, and let's say the gene is very prevalent. They have children with somebody that they've either raped or somehow convinced to mate with or found another wild person. Well, then, yeah, you could keep this sort of stuff going, even if there's sort of, they have bad genes and different weird sort of stuff like that. The point is that it'd be feasible for this to sort of occur, and of course that some might turn cannibalistic, some might turn evil, some might like any other human beings do. So Russian army officials recorded the killing of a wild man in a cave around the Tsar's sort of time and stuff like that. And I mean, this monster came out and attacked them. He was fully covered in fur and sort of stuff like this. Early kings or emperors, Queen of Poland owned and trained a wild man that was captured by her forces. And Transylvania, a wild man was captured in the 14th century and owned by the royalty there. Apparently they were able to do the same things, or to get them to do some kind of small tasks and stuff like that. Two Iran pendeks, they're a sort of shorter version of a sort of a hairy-like human, which now is 100% proven that these guys existed, because they're finding in these islands all around there these skeletal remains, and some are not very old, sort of stuff like this, proving that these little people had giant wide feet, just like a Bigfoot. They were furry little dudes. They were 3 to 5 feet tall, and yes, there was groups of them and sort of stuff like this. So this Iran Pendek is really these same guys, and still being seen to this sort of date. And it guarantees the description is 100% the same as the skeletons that they're finding now in the ground. So there's stupidity and presumptions of just because you find some cave somewhere where you think with this not accurately proven sort of carbon dating or any of these, that you think that this guy is 10,000 years old or 5,000 or 2,000 or whatever it is. This is what you believe, which you're going basis on a science that isn't actually really proven. But the bottom line is that doesn't mean that others didn't survive. There could be like 20 feet away, sort of another group of them that still is surviving. These are older ones that you found in that cave system, right? And sort of stuff like this. One historian had written about these giant hairy 12-foot humans lived in the deserts of Arabia. Interestingly, in 2013, a giant 12-foot plus monster was killed, reported in Iraq by soldiers. This guy stunk to high heaven. He had primitive sort of a giant sort of spear with him, and he actually killed some of the soldiers and stuff like this. I listened to the interviews of these people and all kinds of stuff like this. Either these guys are very well versed in sort of knowledge about Bigfootish and ancient wildish man-like sort of stuff, and really are bored and have nothing better to do with their time, or B, much more likely, they're actually telling you the truth, and the locals around there actually are terrified of going near these caves and tell you this, that giant red-haired sort of hairy people live in them, and sort of stuff like this. So there's actual, but later on we're actually going to show you physical evidence of this proof where it's not even disputable. So these sort of stories actually are not as unbelievable as they may think, because there's actually real physical proof of this sort of stuff. Now, here early reports in the 15th century, travelers from the west brought back tales of 8 men said to be living in the lands of the east. One named Hans Schildenberger describes an account of seeing 2 wild people. Schildenberger was a German nobleman, and he was taken prisoner by Mongol warriors. And while a prisoner, Schildenberger was astonished to see 2 wild men, one a male and the other a female, given as a gift to the warlord who had captured Schildenberger in the territory. They were stocky and covered with hair except for their faces, which were mostly bare. These were said to be almas, he was told, and they were looked at as if they were nothing more than animals and thought to be little different than monkeys or other apes. They were said to be fairly common but becoming rarer at the time. Notice in the account, already in those eras, they were becoming rarer. In ancient time, you find with all this sort of natives that they talk about this, that in the earliest time, the earliest ancestors used to fight with these guys all the time. So after, let's say, this flood existed or whatever and stuff like this, there may have been groups of people that were wild that survived, and they might have been in bigger numbers, and when finally first sort of different cultures started running across them again as they were spreading across the new lands over thousands of years after this flood, they sort of ran across these sort of wild people, would fight with them, and sort of course, because they were even more primitive, they were able to successfully kill them quite often and put them down to lower numbers. but then these wild people learn to more evade people. You can see here in this 15th century sort of artwork here, this guy battling with this wild man. I mean, seriously, how more Bigfootish do you really want to get here? Right? I mean, sort of stuff like this. Early explorers from Spain had fights with giant hairy men in the 1500s, shooting arrows at them. Now, this seems odd for a Sasquatch, although some apes can use tools. Okay, and this is the idea that, again, if it is possible, since there's all kinds of children reported to have been born of these hairy people, and even modern ones that we can find proof of that they actually existed, we can't prove who the ape man was that had the child, but we can certainly prove that this 7-foot monster guy is full of fur, and he lives up in trees and does these kinds of weird stuff, and certainly looks Bigfootish. Well, we can go that far to say that something made him like that. So, see, sort of stuff like this. So, these commanders had to write official documents for the King of Spain and would not fabricate these stories likely fearing execution, because if one member of the crew talked, then the whole ship would sink, so to speak, right? So, again, you have very sort of very important people where historians are always finding proof that, yes, these people were telling the truth when Marco Polo would tell you these stories. A lot of these things have been verified now and stuff like this, proving these people were very accurate quite often in their descriptions of stuff like this. And because these things are in the mass of thousands here, it's improbable that every sort of time that different explorers that don't know each other and all these different sort of stuff can all sort of continue on sort of with the same sort of imagination, especially since I'll show you later, and including what we already showed you there, of a giant finger, that yes, giants for sure did exist, and yes, some of them were furry, right? So it sort of fits all sort of this stuff like this. So many variants of tribes exist sort of out there, right? You find in the Amazon and stuff like that, there's been tribes found. They found these giant sort of bows and arrows and things like this that were thought to belong to actually those Amazon women warriors there and stuff like this, and these different stuff. So these tribes, probably a lot of them really actually did exist, because there's a lot of sort of physical sort of evidence for this. And early newspaper reports, just to give you an idea of how sort of fascinating that this stuff is, one early report in the newspapers was a Sasquatch that was killed, and that it was attacking hardening men in the Okefenokee Swamp in 1829. The swamp is in southern Georgia and surrounding areas. The Milledgeville Statesman had published the story. It was written by a man named John Austin. He lived along the swamp in Ware County, located in Georgia. It was supposed to apparently have magical island in the middle of the swamp, they had said. Now, here's how the story goes. That two old hunters and a younger boy, after hearing about this place and its inhabitants, decided they wanted to see for themselves this great beast that was being reported. They traversed through the swamp, and they had been traveling for roughly 2 weeks when the party came upon huge footprints. They were 18 inches long and 9 inches across. Strides of over 6 feet between them was noted. After the men seen the prints, they decided to return to their place. They started telling the settlers. Then the settlers told them that they had heard about the stories of giants from the Creek Indians, but didn't believe them until the hunters told them their story. Later, 9 hunters from Florida had decided they would go see this beast. They were said to be tough men and used to the outdoors. They brought provisions and stockpile of weapons. Weeks later, they encountered the same type of footprints. They followed them through the day until the footprints joined up to another set of similar tracks. The men decided to make a camp and head out in the morning for home. As they were busy putting the camp together, 2 of the hunters started shooting as a huge creature entered their camp. They were attacked by the beast, and their heads were said to have been torn right off their bodies. The other hunters, gathering together in a large circle, started firing on the beast. They then proceeded to kill it, and sadly they had lost 3 more of their party members in the battle. The men then walked up to the giant hairy beast and then lunged at them and tried to kill them again. Making sure they killed it this time, they blasted it more, and after sure it was dead, then they measured it. And it was said to have been 13 feet tall and described to have copper-colored nails, which is fascinating because you get this same description, everybody from Albert Ostman to all kinds of different native groups quite often telling you that they had copper-colored nails. So I doubt some guy in the 1800s that gorillas weren't even known to exist yet, or any of this kinds of stuff, would sort of then have this sort of knowledge of these sort of weird sort of stuff like this. The head was coned, it was covered in thick fur, he stunk, and he had massive long arms. Okay, so they were so scared that others of its kind might be close, they ran back for the town. Okay, and so that's about the end of that sort of story like that. Daniel Boone was said to have killed the Sasquatch wild man, had a encounter with him. Jacko was captured alive after he was found near railway tracks, half knocked out in Yale, BC. Now, a lot of people for ages there, skeptics, had dismissed this and said there was no such a place and this sort of stuff like this. But apparently what happened was the town had decided quite then, a little bit after this had occurred, to change their name. So when modern researchers started looking for this, they couldn't find this place and thought that it was made up a myth. But actually, these researchers went and found actual records in the hospital in the town that this Jacko actually was brought there. And what had happened was that this train was going by and they found Jacko half knocked out along these tracks. Apparently he might have fallen off of a cliff. Maybe when the train was going by, it possibly might have caused some kind of tremor. You get like landslides in BC quite often and stuff like that, so it's possible by a fluke in a million. This is the only way you would ever catch a Bigfoot sort of, is in these strange sort of occurrences where this creature was so tough that even though it fallen all this distance and half knocked itself out, it still was alive sort of thing like this. And so they had taken it to the town to study it, but nobody, the records lost after that. No sort of record of where, what might have occurred to him after that sort of thing like that. In Deer Isle, Michigan in the 1820s, with an historical sketch of the event, called, and was located, in Maine there, by George L. Hosmer in 1886. He describes finding underneath an old tree 2 skeletons. One was of a person of ordinary size and the other of one who was at least 8 feet in height. Between the ribs of the larger one was found the head of a dart made of copper. Now, you also get these same stories from these early sort of guys when they first came over in Florida and stuff like that. Same thing, they said that these giant hairy people, the natives would fight with them and kill them with these poisonous copper darts and stuff like that. So here you have a separate guy completely in a major different sort of place where you have a native group dealing with the big monster guys the same way with some kind of dart, where maybe they would use some local poisonous bush of some sort or some kind of animal, who knows, or a blowfish poison, who knows, like any kind of weird thing that would be available to them as some kind of wacky thing depending on the region, that they might sort of use a methodology like this to be able to be from far distance from these big hairy ape people and sort of blast the guy with this poisonous dart, because maybe normal weapons wouldn't work that great. The larger one was said to have been mortally wounded by the smaller one, and the smaller one probably fell by the hands of the larger. The conflict must have happened a long time ago before the discovery, as they must have lain upon the ground, and the tree which grew over them must have been a long time in attaining its growth. So, so like, I mean, it could have been like, maybe hundreds of years before or whatever, right? It's hard to know depending on the tree. He doesn't mention what kind of tree it was and that sort of stuff. They were found nearly 60 years ago, and a medical man then residing in the town gathered up the skeleton of the larger one and preserved it, putting it in the bones together. He stated that the height of the man was above, as stated, about 8 feet. A trapper in BC in the 1800s captured a wild woman 8 feet tall, covered in hair, large statured in a bear trap, and brought her back alive. He then had her caged, and she was shown at a fair on Vancouver Island until police were notified and made him let her go. So they must have thought, by looking her, that even though she was a big furry sort of ape woman, she must have looked human enough to them to sort of be convinced that she actually was a human. And this would then, of course, the police says if it allows some guy to have somebody, a human for slavery, sort of a thing like this, so they would sort of make him let her go. So isn't that fascinating? But the only way she got caught, the same thing with a bizarre bear trap, right? Sort of stuff like this. So it must have got her in a really bad spot or she didn't understand how to open up the trap, or too much pain, who knows, whatever. And this guy sort of got her and stuff like this. Another record of a Texas rancher killed a Bigfoot in the 1800s. Another story, 1800s, Bigfoot was lassoed and sent to jail. That was hilarious. I don't have the, I might have it on one of the other, I can't remember if I put that one in or not, but I haven't seen the newspaper article in ages, but it's quite funny about this, apparently sort of sheriffy-like guy, and the guy's on a horse, and this wild man was out in this open sort of prairie, came out of a forest, so there was this open section that he could actually catch up to this guy because he's on a horse, and he actually lassoed this giant Bigfoot, sort of hairy man, and sort of arrested him. Apparently, it was either that one or there was a couple that I had like this where they actually arrested Bigfoot and threw this hairy man into jail, right? So one of them, at least anyways that I can recall, had escaped somehow and pushed, actually was able to bust himself sort of out. The other one, I don't recall exactly what had happened to it or whatever, or if they let him go or whatever in a case like this, like that. Another one in 1917, a Bigfoot was shot in a barn in Oklahoma. The case of Zana the Elma, now this one here, the Russian army had captured this wild woman, Almisa, naked, covered in hair, and she was sold to a man of means and became docile after being caged for several years. She was over 7 feet tall, as a gigantic sort of furry sort of woman, head to toe, looked extremely like ancient Neanderthalic sort of thing, and very similar to any sort of Bigfoot sighting of a Bigfoot sort of female of today, sort of stuff. She was mated with, and even photos of sort of some of the, I don't think this was her direct children, it might have been like the, like the second one down or something like this, but anyway, some of her relatives were actually tested that were still alive and sort of stuff like this, and these guys look exactly more like a werewolf sort of man, where the same thing like these natives, where you see only partial hair and then other parts they're not hairy at all, sort of stuff, like as if they took from the both. Now, I highly suspect that whoever was mating with her to have these children, this rich man of means, or and this sort of stuff, or other wackos did this, I kind of doubt, even though even though they might be a primitive human, and maybe the males come and rape females and sort of stuff like this, I would suspect that any guy would probably be pretty nervous of trying to jump on top of some 7 foot or so sort of giant hairy woman here. As sort of, you would think that maybe she might kill him in a second, like, or this kind of stuff like this. So my suspect is that probably some stuff was fed to her occasionally of some kind of drug-like thing, booze, whatever, or some kind of weird methodology like that to knock her out to do the mating. That this is what I would sort of suspect. I doubt, unless that this furry lady sort of had a liking for him or something like that, I suppose is possible. But I mean, I kind of more think that possibly that in this case that she probably wasn't doing this on her own sort of accord. Sort of stuff like that. But there seems to be reports like this all over the place through those sort of regions of always the natives telling you that no matter what the native group is, that these Neanderthal sort of giant cave women and men exist, and they do come down sometimes, and some even have clubs. With them and sort of stuff like this. And there also seems to be a third type here. That's also in that region. We'll cover it later, sort of where it's definitely some kind of more great ape-ish, not very likely a human of any sort, but it's still another one out there that is evading us, sort of a thing like that. They seem to be rarer, this sort of particular kind, but there's some conclusive, pretty good evidence that we'll talk about later that does show that this third sort of possibility exists. So you have three sorts of stuff here. You have a typical wild man where they're humans, where they can actually mate with another human and have an offspring. We also have a sort of like a great ape sort of thing that not likely they could do this. Sort of thing like that and have a successful offspring, but may also kill people, like be cannibalistic, and may also sort of try stuff like that. It wouldn't matter. Like, I mean, they may still find some maidens sexually attractive to them, but they just might not have a child. Sort of thing like that. So there's that. But then there's a third type here that seems much more like a Mayaka ape sort of thing, some kind of possibly unknown orangutan sort of like a creature that in certain areas around the world sort of exists as well, and especially in the sort of Mongolia, Russia sort of region and stuff like that. But the bottom line is that for sure we'll show you as we keep going along that guaranteed not tens of thousands of times here that this has all been imagination, and since they're all telling you the same stuff, and we even have bones and records of them and those kind of stuff. I mean, eventually you got to see that it's very feasible that yes, there's probably some wild humans out there that we, do evade us and sort of may still be surviving in some of our cave systems worldwide and stuff like this. One group I interviewed, there was these two fellows there. They were hunters, and this was in the later 70s there, and they were down this sort of pathway, and they heard this sort of screeching like thing, and this giant Bigfoot started running right towards them. They blasted it, it started screeching, and then it turned around and it ran back into the forest, and they kept hearing it screeching and stuff like this. So I actually went to the sort of area where they had seen it, stuff like that, and this Kiamichi's mountain system is pretty wild. It's extremely remote. It was very difficult to even get in these areas, some of them. And I even caught fish species there that I just noticed scientifically was just recently discovered. I didn't know that they didn't know they were in there, or I could have told them this decades ago. When I was down there, I caught all kinds of stuff. It was excellent spotted bass fishing there, smallmouth, largemouth, different gar, sort of bullfins, all kinds of different stuff like that. Catfish of different sorts, flatheads and things like that, and all kinds of different stuff was in this system and sort of stuff like this. But just recently, some weren't even knowing that was in there, and they found this. So it's quite a remote area. I also saw a possible thunderbirdish sort of bird, because even the two young fellows, they just thought it was a giant buzzard, but they didn't really know what species it was or anything like this, and sort of stuff like that. But I'll talk about that another time. But they were related to these two hunters, sort of, and this is how I'd gotten this story, so I checked out this location, and this is a giant mountainous wilderness. There's probably caving systems in there. I saw a spider on the ground there that was so gigantic. I have never seen anything like this. I don't know what it was, some kind of big, giant, black, sort of tarantula-like looking spider. But I'm telling you, this dude was the size of, with his legs span across, of a typical sized dinner plate. It had a giant body on it in the center. We were walking along this sort of pathway crossing in this sort of remote camp forest, and we went across this little pathway, and this thing went right out on the road, and I've never seen anything more scary in my entire life. I thought that, and another thing I ran across there, when it was there too, that was sort of scary. I saw this scorpion. I wasn't sure what kind it was, but I backed off from it. But I also almost stepped on a 5.5 foot long diamondback rattlesnake. And at that point, I did not know that rattlesnakes also live out in the grass. So this is just a tip for you, if you're, especially Canadian people and stuff like this. When you're out in these grasses in the United States in some areas, don't be thinking that rattlesnakes only live with John Wayne out in the sort of desert, because this is not the case. These things are out in your sort of lawns and stuff like that. They can be out in these sorts of spots too. And what had happened, we were walking along, it was at nighttime. The guy was walking right beside me, and he said, "Hey, quick, somebody go get me a big stick, go get a stump like this." And so then one of them went back and found this sort of big stick like this. And I said, "What's wrong like this?" And he says, "Just hang on a second like this." Then he shines his flashlight down, and bang, he nails this. He smashed this snake over the head, and he picks it up, and the snake, with roughly about the size of me at the time as a much younger fellow, sort of thing, and this sort of thing. And I mean, absolutely astonishing. Like, here I missed this dude by an inch, was right out in the grass, and sort of like, I mean, that thing could have easily bitten you and stuff like that. So pretty wild. So it's a very remote sort of area and stuff like this, with very sparse like roads, and then once you get a certain point there is no roads, and it's just mountainous forest. Probably, I wouldn't be surprised with caves in it and all kinds of stuff. So perfect sort of an area for a sort of, and interviewing these guys, I 100% sort of believe them. They were very serious sort of people, and I just sort of like, I'm pretty convinced. And also because the same kind of niche areas had other reports and other sort of stuff like that. And being in this wilderness, I could easily see groups of them hiding in there and nobody would see them. I mean, I was fishing there for like about 10 to 11 days, I guess, or something. And I mean, I never saw, besides these crazy hunting kids and these one guys, that was about it, traversing miles of this stuff and being paranoid, worrying every second that you're going to step on some giant snake or a giant sort of tarantula monster or whatever else. It's a wild place, so it's very believable that some wild humans could easily survive in an area like that. I mean, lots of food, lots of sort of stuff around, and you would never see them in a million years. I mean, the trees were big, all kinds of stuff. There was mountains after mountains after mountains, and it's quite a large area. And we have these same areas all across Canada, United States, of big piles of forest, which little roads or nothing is traversing in them, and these sort of stuff like this. So another things about this is that these same habits, all these sort of people, sort of no matter what, they're all telling me the same thing. Ancient guys to people I've interviewed all got the same story, right? So that's another sort of important clue to me, that it can't be all imaginary, because there's no way that random people that are some little villager guy, he doesn't have the sort of experience of knowing about books written thousands of years ago in different cultures saying these things and these weird stuff. This guy wouldn't know that. So he'd have to, each person would have to imagine this all in their mind and get this completely right. Like, why doesn't the guy have a horn on his head half the time? Or why didn't she have 3 boobs instead of 2? Or whatever, right? Like, there'd be many variants and stuff like this, but you don't sort of see this as consistently always the same sort of stuff. The caveman monster lives in the caves or in the deepest forest. He walks around and he occasionally will grab sort of maidens and sort of stuff like this and these kinds of stuff. They all sort of shoot rocks and stuff like this. You see this in everyone from English reports from back in the 14th, 12th, like all these different centuries where these wild men would throw stones at you. And here is story Ape Canyon, where I doubt these miners would know stories from England from centuries before and stuff like this, or from these native groups like that didn't talk to white man that much. I doubt they would be this familiar with all this stuff and be able to sort of invent this in their mind, imagine it, sort of stuff. These miners were attacked in the Ape Canyon, and the story again was thought to be sort of fake because they could never find this place. Well, just very recently, some researchers actually found the cabin, and it actually, you can see all the damage still on it from up in the cliffs of these caves where these cave monsters were shooting the boulders on them. And they attacked them day and night. They were after them, shooting them. They got upset with these miners for some reason. And the thing is that one of the miners, they thought they killed one of them because the guy mentions that he had shot up and that he saw the sort of Bigfoot monster fall off the cliff and fall below. So these people have now actually proven that this place really existed because on the maps it's not called Ape Canyon. And this was the same thing with the Yale, that in old times they were called something else, but modern different things had changed their name over time. So that stuff was lost, and of course then the skeptic just never can find it. So then of course he would believe that the story's fake, right? But I mean, the reality is it's actually real. And so what this group is they're actually trying to search around there where this spot where this Bigfoot was shot off the cliff, that possibly maybe even a small section of one of his bones may still be down there in the gully someplace that got lucky where it wasn't taken away by animals or something like that, right? Which would take some luck, because I've seen even giant cow carcasses in one night. The guy put on film, just left it out there in an open field with nothing, no animals around. You can see miles off in the distance. You don't see a single thing. But at night, the creatures come out, and boom, 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 like this whole cow vanishes completely within a 24-hour period. Not even a speck of it left, right? So it all depends on the sort of spot like that, where you might get lucky once in a while where there isn't a lot of local sort of foragers, and yes, the bone finally starts to sink in the muck a bit, wasn't eaten by something, and stays in the spot. But otherwise, a lot of times these things would just be torn apart and kept eating upon until there'd be no bone left, and that sort of stuff like that. They would sink in the soil. The soil's quite acidic, and especially BC and stuff like that, and start rotting away quite quickly, right? And that sort of stuff. So that's why you wouldn't find sort of these things. But these guys at least have a little bit of a chance here, sort of stuff like that. In 1941, a Bigfoot was killed by a hunter in Manitoba, Canada, this native trapper guy, and he was so concerned after looking at it a bit that he might get in trouble and thought it could be a giant human. So again, here's somebody looking at the sort of creature after he killed it and sort of now coming to the conclusion that Jesus looks a bit more humanish-like in some ways, sort of stuff like this. Another famous one, the Minnesota Iceman. Now, of course, everybody, you always see these skeptics who say it was a guy, like a rubber sort of made man that they had put in this sort of thing. And that's all 100% true. However, there's a lot more to it than this. This guy that actually put this sort of Minnesota Iceman out there and was showing them in the fairs, sort of thing, he actually was an army person that was in sort of Vietnam, and at first what he had stated is that he had killed this creature in the Minnesota woods and stuff like this. But here's the interesting thing. It was found out later that this guy actually was in Vietnam, and what had happened was in Vietnam they have these wild men there, and they're not exactly like our Sasquatch. They seem to be a bit more primitive, human-like to a certain degree, and sort of stuff like that, but very furry and sort of all that sort of stuff, and super powerful, ape-manish like bodies to them and stuff. But apparently a lot of Vietnam sort of soldiers would fight with these guys occasionally. And the Vietnamese even warned them of them in there and this sort of stuff like this. And what was thought is that this guy actually had gotten some through the army, because in the army, right, I mean, it's different. This guy had the right connections. He got the body smuggled over. He had actually... apparently him and his men were in this area, and there was like 4 or 5 of these guys, and one of them they were able to successfully kill when they were shooting at them and stuff, and they smuggled this guy back, and his idea was he was going to put it out on this sort of exhibition. But then police and other people and weird stuff started coming around and stuff like this, and this guy got paranoid thinking that sort of he might get in trouble and stuff like this. So what he did was, it was said that one of the theories is that he sold this body to the Smithsonian Institution, to some guy there. There's some other theories out there, but bottom line is that somehow he got rid of the body, but they gave him enough decent money then he thought, hey, geez, I was showing this thing for a bit. In the first show that he made, he had it frozen, and he was able to keep it frozen. But to do a tour, you can't do this anymore like this, so the real body, even if he had kept it, wouldn't have been much use to him. He wouldn't have been able to keep it preserved properly and stuff like this. So when he sold this thing, what he did is then he had gotten some guy to sort of make him a sort of a fake-like one, where he tried to match it as best as he could. But I mean, anybody looking at this in 2 seconds could clearly see that it wasn't a real one. And he put it in this sort of like glass-like stuff, so this way he didn't need the ice anymore, and he could show it around to these different sort of stuff like this. So, but it's very suspected these 2 scientists that looked at it, one are considered the father of cryptozoology, Bernard Hugelmans. I talked to him a few times many years ago when I was younger and stuff like that. He was an interesting fellow. I don't sort of agree, though, with some of the stuff like that. Like, he was certainly the first person on track of known animals, stuff like that. So some of his works were fantastic and stuff like that. And certainly a lot of his things that I read when I was a young fellow, I certainly enjoyed them and sort of found him a very expert on this sort of subject worldwide. And this guy was very into this sort of things. But he was not sort of the first person to sort of be interested in this sort of stuff. In fact, there was newspaper writers in the 1800s that wrote about all these things quite frequently. They were actually sort of known subjects, even things like the Watoric and all these sorts of ones from New Zealand and different ones. I found this one article from the 1800s that every single animal that is in the Track of Unknown Animals by Bernard Hugelmans was in this newspaper article, including a few of his stories. So I suspect that when he was young, he might have found this article somehow, and this influenced him from there to sort of start investigating these sort of stuff. Because this guy covers every single cryptid that pretty well was in his book in one newspaper article in the 1800s. And Bernard Hugelmans wasn't born then yet. So I kind of like to state that he was the origin of sort of like the first guy that was interested in this sort of stuff. There was people way before his time, everybody, P.T. Barnum, all kinds of people. There's been many, many people that have been interested in this subject way before my time, and I'm one of the earlier ones out there of more modern eras. I've been doing this since I was 2 years old, so I'm fascinated because my grandmother, 2 years of age, out on our Charleston Lake, was petrified and warned me to stay away, that there was giant snakes in the lake, and that there was this big sort of Loch Ness monster sort of thing that lived there. My mother actually saw some kind of giant shadow of the thing that went by her sort of boat. My great-grandmother actually had told my grandmother this when she was sort of younger. They were out, her and her hubby, and they were out sort of going out rowing, and that this sort of head like a sea serpent came out of the water. It was higher than their boat. It was pitch black, and he went along and sort of then just went down. But he was quiet, and she said it reminded her of like a big swan's like head, but sort of like different sort of thing like this. And I guarantee you, I know these people, beyond a shadow of a doubt, they were the most sort of crazy, like they wouldn't lie for even you if you asked them to or anything, right? So these people, if these people said they saw this stuff, they did. And my mother saw a very large, also a giant snake in that sort of lake. I personally did myself, actually, the biggest snake I've ever seen sort of in that lake, and stuff like this. So I'll cover this in another sort of subject, but I've been at this a long time, but when I was a young fellow, when I was talking to these guys, I mean, I was just a little kid, but I had the same interest as them and sort of stuff like that. So these guys were just a bit older than me, but a lot of them got around interested in it at the same time I did, sort of stuff like that. It's just that they were sort of adult and stuff like that. And I mean, I talked with everybody from Roger Patterson himself to all kinds of stuff. I used to chat with John Green a lot and all kinds of different researchers, right? And stuff like that. I haven't in massive ages. I don't sort of, I don't know, I just, over the years I've became more sort of quiet sort of guy. I don't really sort of get involved in big circles and stuff like that. But I commend all these researchers of today, but I mean, a lot of these people today, you know, the guy, I'm a cryptozoologist and I'm like this, but I mean, the guy's been at it like for a few years, you know, sort of stuff. There's been people like, my opinion on stuff is, remember, I have like over 5 decades of research here on these kinds of stuff, right? Whilst with a lot of these people, I mean, they're more sort of a modern, like sort of a thing like this. So my viewpoint is I've had, since a tiny little child, I was able to read at the age level of a typical high school student before I was 4 years of age. My mother was an educational teacher sort of person, and that sort of stuff like that. So I was taught at an extremely young age how to do these sorts of stuff, and so my interest was I was adult, like I was raised around a lot of adults, so my even BA, a lot of this sort of stuff, I had adult-like interests, so I would read constantly all the time about these kinds of stuff, and I would go into libraries, get my mother to drop me off there, and I'd sit there all day and read in these sort of libraries, researching papers around this sort of stuff about dragons and all kinds of I was somehow right from day one sort of meant to sort of be interested in this sort of a subject and sort of stuff like this. So when I talk to skeptics and stuff like this, if these guys had the amount of sort of research that I did and seen the 5 million sort of times the same story, and from the guy from Alaska to a guy over here that you know could have never talked to him, well, you can see why my opinion would be sort of different than a lot of just a typical skeptic where the guy has no sort of like this gigantic background to him where he sort of understands all the variables. All he hears is, oh yeah, Bigfoot was out in the woods and it was first seen in the 50s, and like the guy doesn't know all this other stuff about it and this sort of stuff. So this is why I wanted to sort of I covered this sort of thing about these things to give you a bit more in-depth knowledge about the sort of whole sort of scope of it out there, so that even a scientific person and stuff like this could at least look upon this and say, well, man, geez, you know, that's, you know, when you got physical evidence and you got the same stories by thousands of people, I mean, you can't just keep saying it's, you know, has no validity to it, right? Like, sort of stuff like this. So that's the idea. So anytime when you listen to these kids on this sort of thing, and the guy's doing some cryptozoological show or any of this kind of stuff, you have to remember that a lot of them will be skeptical of Bigfoot or this kinds of stuff. It's just because they don't have the knowledge yet of the actual. You have to, any scientist, until the guy actually spent years researching this, he's going to be skeptical because the guy doesn't have the information that's required to sort of make a bit more of a sort of a good perspective sort of view on it, where you've now looked at all the sort of evidence out there. Right? A lot of these guys, I've heard them, the guy says, I've looked at the evidence of Bigfoot, there's nothing out there. Well, obviously, I've already shown you all kinds of stuff that are showing you that consistently since time began that there has been wild people reported in cave-like systems. Like, so there's, but a lot of these people don't know these sort of stuff like this, and that this is the thing, right? Many more exist of stories of wild men being captured, some even on families' crests. You can find in different English crests here where these wild men were captured in Saxony, all over the place, sort of different ones like that. So far we have concluded that although not proven, wild men have been said to have been captured or shot or witnessed since earliest times. They are always described roughly the same. So though in modern times no specimen has been examined by a scientist, they likely have already examined one, not knowing that they have. Many of the burial grounds that they find giants in, that the Smithsonian admitted that they threw out many of them due to Darwinism, the Smithsonian was actually sued back a while ago about this sort of stuff, and they actually had to admit in court that they had thrown away thousands of these giant skeletons. But luckily, quite a few of these still exist. Now look at this one here, okay? Now, here you can see the pointed sort of crest like that, exactly very Bigfootish sort of stuff like this. So every time people saying caveman and you got this different group that's saying, well, no, Bigfoot can't exist, all this kind of stuff, it's the same thing. You have a hairy human being that you found in a cave. You got the giant skull. It's right in front of you here. Right? I mean, there's no disputing these. These are actually, some are still in museums and stuff where they did not get rid of them due to Darwinism, and they can still be touched and analyzed and looked upon, and they're not old. So proving that a giant sort of monster guy did live in some kind of cave not that long ago. So then, again, this is sort of, this stuff is that people are sort of not understanding that really the one is actually the same as the other in a lot of sort of instances here. I mean, look at the size of these sort of stuff. Beach giant skull unearthed by WPA workers near Victoria, sort of stuff like this. These skeletons are worldwide. We're always the same sort of stuff. It's a giant hairy man, quite often, and stuff like this that you get of reports in the same place that they're finding these sort of skeletons and stuff like this. So, again, these two different groups have never sort of correlated this sort of stuff together. And I mean, I've been thinking this since I was a kid because I saw all these ancient tapestries of wild people and all this sort of stuff, and I noticed a lot of them made them man-like looking and stuff like that. And how many reports would have clubs and weird stuff like this. So, although I fully agree that there's ape species also unknown to science out there that are very similar to this, the Bigfoot sighting phenomena, quite a few of them are probably these ancient giants and this sort of stuff like this, and for sure they actually do exist. We're guaranteed, at least in our times, that some people of giant height and giant size existed that were quite furry. So, again, I mean, it doesn't matter whether the guy's a human or a ape or whatever he is, you're still, no matter what, the person's telling you the truth that a cave monster man guy lives out in that woods somewhere and he's 8 feet tall and he stinks and he's furry. So this is the problem, and these two sort of Bigfoot sort of factions don't want to sort of just say, okay, maybe we shouldn't really be shooting one of these, but let's try and capture one somehow, and this sort of stuff like this. So even myself, I wouldn't personally, like, now, if the Sasquatch was coming at me or is married or whatever, and all that kind of stuff, and he's coming at the wife or whatever, I would have no other choice. I gotta do this, right? Like, but I wouldn't want to do that, and I certainly wouldn't go out of my way to do it, and I would only do it if it's right at the last second where this thing's about to kill us, and I got no choice, right? I mean, because it'd be just like a human trying to murder you. You got to defend yourself somehow or whatever, right? So you got no choice sometimes in the matter. But for people to be just running out of shooting at this sort of stuff like this, whether he's a great ape or a real human or both, that really sort of like on that side of it, I understand. I mean, if the thing's going to come at you and attack you or whatever and stuff like that, but I mean, if you didn't need to kill them, there can't be many, right, in whatever area that you see it, and so probably there'd be a lot better ways, and this is why probably these traps, all these kinds of stuff that people are trying and stuff, these guys are human-like intelligence, at least most of them. And that's why they're not stupid. They can probably smell like these early captures, like that girl that was captured in the 1800s that was brought to Vancouver Island, okay, with the bear trapper. Back then, there would have been more probably wild people, less forest disturbed, more sorts of stuff. Back then, because they had such rare sort of run-ins with white humans or this sort of like regular Europeans, and only just with natives and stuff, there might have been the odd luck like that, where the odd rare guy could have put out a bear trap or some kind of lucky thing and catch it. But probably like in more, so because they have a human-like intelligence, it's very possible that because just like any human, you're walking along, you might be then sort of notice that somebody must have been walking through this pathway recently. So then now you're wondering what's going on, and you would look on the ground and sort of analyze, and you would see that something's suspicious there. So possibly all these kinds of stuff could sort of, because they're human-like, they would sort of know that if they see a hunter coming along with a gun, they might sort of saw him observing in the past that the guy shoots at something and kills it, and they see one of their animal brethren now laying dead there, they would realize that this would be dangerous, and because they're human-like, would tell others of their own kind this to keep an eye out and sort of beware of humans, right? So this would be sort of another sort of thing to it, where it'd be very easy for them to sort of evade us, sort of stuff like that. Like, here, these are indisputable sort of proofs that these things exist. Like here, this giant jawbone here. Okay, now look at that. Look at the size and teeth of that. That's exactly like, there was even elk bones found in recent years where the teeth marks on them match a Gigantopithecus, sort of, right to the teeth. It was human-like teeth that was sent over 30 dental experts and stuff like that, including the DNA was humanish-like, but not exactly the same. And this is the thing is that it's very feasible that either both sort of kinds of the basic, like a great ape or two of some sort, as well as a giant human, but no matter what, all three of them sort of make up the sighting sort of stuff. So whether even the monkey ones are not real, it doesn't matter. They're still as giant hairy humans that fit the description of what we as seeing as Sasquatch would report, and therefore, since their skeletons are all over the place, yes, they actually existed. Right? Now here's Big Omar here, reported to be another one of Trudeau's guards. No, all kidding aside, this was a giant here, but you can see this dude here. Now look at the size of this man, right? And these two here, I was that'd be pretty funny if they were a couple. I wonder who was the boss. Get me a drink, you biatch. I doubt she'd be arguing with her too much, you know. but you can see that females or males can be sort of gigantic like this. Now, even though this is more of the European life, and Omar here is a little bit more furry, but I mean, the point is that there would be variants of this stuff, and if giant people like this were born sometime in villages ancient times ago and happened to have also this furry sort of stuff to them, again, it'd be very feasible that they could actually survive in our gaming systems and stuff like this and avoid us. Here's some other giants here. Look at the size of this dude back in the day, right? So I mean, these are some pretty big monsters here. Like, I mean, this lady's head. Well, anyways, we'll bypass that. But anyway, you can see, you know, she's pretty short compared to her, anyways, and this sort of stuff, right? So, I mean, fascinating, but it just goes to prove that for sure. I mean, there's quite a few that giants did certainly exist, and I mean, so far it's very feasible. Like, I mean, none of these things would be impossible that a furry caveman guy that was thrown out of the village couldn't live in the cave nearby there and also be responsible for local sightings for possibly even 100 years if the guy had a good life health to him or ate well or whatever it is, right? Sort of stuff like this. And could keep the caveman population going by even just grabbing a maiden or two and having a few children. That'd be enough to keep those guys alive for another 50, 100 years, sort of thing, right? Now, here the story of the love block giants ends up being true. In early 1900s, looking for guano, these guano guys, it's bad shit there, they found these red-haired giants in the cave. Okay, now some were up to 11 feet tall. The group of cavemen would attack the natives, raping and eating them. This was already written about in the book way before they found them, so this was thought to be a myth by natives, and people reading this book at the time would have thought that this was not true, of course, but this Sarah Winnemacher, she talks about this in The Life of the Paiute. It's a fascinating book, and her account and stuff like this, and talks about these red-haired giants that lived up in the cave, and they would come down all the time and rape and sort of and eat their sort of children or adults, and they were cannibalistic. They were giants. They had red hair. They didn't use too much sort of weapony-like stuff. Apparently, some of them actually were intelligent enough, though, to make giant sort of shoes and stuff like this. And you find this in some of the accounts. Here's a fossilized sort of an ancient sort of a giant footprint here. Sort of stuff like this. And here's the skulls of some of the Lovelock giants that are still around. So this is not disputable. These actually like up to 11 feet tall. Some of them did have sort of like sandals and weird stuff like that, but the bottom line is that you have a native group telling you that these hairy cannibals came out of the cave and would come down and get you. They also say a lot of them were barefooted anyways. They mentioned this or stuff, but they said some had sort of weird, like, so some of them probably were a bit more intelligent than the next guy and actually made themselves some kind of shoes or whatever and this kinds of stuff. But the bottom line, they were up to 11 feet tall, 100% fitting your normal sort of Sasquatch-like things. They had red hair, covered in full red hair. They lived in the cave. They came down and they would rape the sort of native women and men and this sort of stuff or eat them, right? So you have their skeletons there. They're still in a museum in Arizona. You have all kinds of their remains that was left of the different sort of stuff. And they found in the pits that it showed that they were cannibals. They were somehow using and grinding them up and sort of, they kill the person and sort of break them down somehow and then sort of eat them or something. So this is not disputable. These things are all there. They're 100% proven sort of a fact. And this, again, how any person could say that a Bigfoot-like creature doesn't exist when 100% this is the same story as every other person, group of natives worldwide are telling you. the same thing. They're telling you that a giant ogre-like guys live in their caves, they're full of fur, and they either rape or eat you, or sometimes will leave you alone, depending on the one, right? And just like any other human, some humans are cannibalistic, other humans are nice guys, right? So I mean, but this particular group that was living in this cave system was not nice guys. And so these natives got tired of warring with them, like I showed you all the reports previous year of these wars with early natives and Leif Erikson and everybody else, sort of stuff. This same thing would continue. So can you imagine in each sort of range across the United States, North America, Europe, any place, wherever you got groups of people that would be near one of these caving-like systems or thick forests and stuff, where a few of these guys exist, you are going to have this sort of run-ins, where if they had these behaviors and they're cannibalistic, then you would have these sort of run-ins, and then these native stories are actually really real. At least this one is proven to be. Now, here's another one here. I mean, this to me is fantastic evidence that a Bigfoot-like humans exist in our sort of world here. This one here, the Santiago giant, okay? He was 8 foot plus on him. Now, look at the sort of big crest there on the top of the head. Exactly like any sort of typical Bigfoot. You also notice that there's not much of a neck here. It's much more closer to the shoulders and very broad, wide, sort of like this. This one happens to be a bit more where it might have been a mid-spring one. And this is what I'm getting at, is that I believe that some places, like in the remotest areas of Russia, let's say, where there is no sort of people that the local, caveman monster can go down and sort of rape somebody and have sort of half babies now, where they're keeping some of the European genes in them. In isolated areas, you may still have just enough of them that was out there, groups of these from ancient times that made this little population, where there'd be enough of them to continue on this, and they become the biggest, the sort of areas, the sort of all this sort of stuff. But they'd be in some places, occasionally when they would capture a maiden or something like this, some of their offspring may take some of the more human-like sort of stuff to them, where their feet isn't like on this guy here. His feet is not as Sasquatchy as typical, but the thing is that you see these variants all the time. So the bottom line is that right in front of you here, you can see a 8 foot sort of dude that matches 100% pretty well a normal Bigfoot sort of description. He's covered in his sort of hair here and all that sort of stuff, and this sort of thing. Well, there is one right in front of you, right? Like, I mean, what more do you sort of like? Sadly, these burial mounds and stuff like this, sort of stuff like this, you can't touch these things anymore. But back then, they were finding them all the time, and these guys always matched this sort of stuff. And quite often, they found weapons in them sometimes where somebody had killed them. And this is my belief, that these natives, as they say, have been fighting with this ancient tribe of giants for thousands of years in different areas. And depending, some areas are very common, other areas there's barely none of them. But the point is that they are telling you the truth, that sort of a very large human-like sort of people do exist in our cave systems, and do sort of, fit all the sort of descriptions like that. Now, hilariously, the Smithsonian Institution tried to deny that one and said it was made out of Jell-O. So, I mean, if you believe that, I mean, really. Anyways, here's some different ones here, like maybe related to the Cardiff giant, the St. Paul Globe, January 24th, 1904. Winnemucca, Nevada. Workmen engaged in digging gravel here today uncovered at a depth of about 12 feet a lot of bones, parts of the skeleton of a gigantic human being. Dr. Samuels examined them and pronounced them to be the bones of a man who must have been nearly 11 feet in height. The metacarpal bone measured 4.5 inches in length and are large in proportion. A part of the ulam was found, and in its complete form would have been between 17 and 18 inches in length. The remainder of the skeleton is being searched for. Okay? So again, people always, these ancient sort of these old stories in the papers and stuff like this, back then Bigfoot wasn't being talked about, back any of this sort of stuff, so most people think this is a different subject. I'm telling you it's exactly the same thing. I've already shown you this, that it doesn't matter. You got human and native groups telling you that a big furry hairy man lives in this sort of stuff, and we're finding their skeletons all over the place here of people matching this sort of right description of the size and sort of stuff like this. Here's St. Paul, Minnesota. All these sort of areas where you still find these sort of stories about giant wild men out in the cave systems and stuff like this. Among the relics of the mound builders, okay, and in the river valley, the mound was 60 feet in diameter and 12 feet high. Near the center were found bones of about a dozen men and women mixed with the bones of various animals. Some abnormally large bones. The man who bore it was evidently a giant. Thorough investigation of the mound and that sort of stuff like this. Some of these were cut off. I don't know what happened, so I'm missing some of the sort of thing. But I mean, these were in very sort of like the New York Times is not some rag magazine here and stuff like this. There was all kinds of these, right? Many of them in the New York Times and stuff. Here's another one there. Professor Norris, the ethnologist who had been examining the mounds in a section of the West Virginia for several months the other day, opened one mound, and where was it here? He found, this one's hard to read here, it got cut off, but anyways, he had found this sort of a giant in there that this guy had like copper sort of bracelets on him and all kinds of stuff, but he was like this big sort of giant, sort of hairy, sort of ape-man sort of, and the guy was about 10 feet in height with a ridgepole 1 foot in diameter, and so that was erected around this sort of thing like that, but this one got cut off, so I don't remember this whole one. There's so many of these, but bottom line is, in this case, you actually have like a giant human sort of, where this guy was making a bit sort of primitive stuff for himself, yet he's still a sort of big monster dude here, and these natives did these mounds, and a lot of these natives, if you talk to them in the different areas, they say that they were giants that they killed, and they put them in there and stuff like this, and this was sort of like a remembrance sort of stuff, and also to sort of honor the great killing and all these kinds of weird sort of things, depending on the tribe, what they thought, but that sort of idea. Wisconsin Mound open. Here's another one. Maple Creek, Wisconsin, December 19th. One of the 3 recently discovered mounds in the town has been opened. In it was found the skeleton of a man of gigantic size. The bones measured from head to foot over 9 feet and were in fair state of preservation. The skull was as large as a half a bushel measure. Some finely tempered rods of copper and other relics were lying near the bones. The mound from which these relics were taken was 10 feet high and 30 feet long, and varies from 6 to 8 feet in width. The 2 mounds of lesser size will be examined soon. So there was constantly these giant sort of some had sort of primitive like stuff with them, but others no, right? So here, even over in Egypt, in 1881, a Professor Timmerman was engaged in exploring the ruins of an ancient temple of Isis on the banks of the Nile. 16 miles below Djibouti, he opened a row of tombs in which some prehistoric race of giants had been buried. The smallest skeleton out of the some 60-odd which were examined during the time of Timmerman was excavated at Djibouti, measured 7 feet 8 inches in length, and the largest 11 feet 1 inch. Memorial tablets were discovered in great numbers, but there was no record that even hinted that they were in memory of men of that sort of eras of extraordinary size. It is believed that the tomb dates back to 1043 BC. So the idea here is, again, is that you're seeing the same sort of stuff where these constant skeletons are matching 100% the typical wild manish Bigfoot-like sighting and hiding sort of stuff like that. Some are more sort of intelligent where they had a bit of stuff to them, but others not. Some had more feet where they're giant feet, but more human-like a little bit, were not as wide. But in other areas, they were very wide, depending on the terrain. Just like I was mentioning about the Ibugogo and all these sort of ones, all of the footprints, all the stuff that they found so far, they're exactly like a miniature Bigfoot where they have very wide feet and sort of stuff like this. So no matter what, you're finding skeletons of both sort of varieties here, and seemingly a mixture of their between them, where some of them have some fur but not as much as others sort of things, and different sizes to them and variants. Because what if they all are really just wild sort of people, but some are more furry than the next, that live in a cave-like environment and decide to hide amongst us, right? And this sort of stuff like that. Here, there's the bigger giants, sort of in ancient times sort of stuff, where now you're sort of getting into this range of these, 20, 30-foot tall ogres, like in this ancient sort of depiction here, where this whole tribe had to sort of battle with this ogre that was constantly killing people and eating them and stuff like this. So they got pissed off and decided to kill him and sort of got him, right? That sort of stuff like that. And I mean, this depiction's like a gazillion years old, sort of stuff like that. So fascinating. I mean, just another sort of interesting thing. And what's interesting here is, let's say that this is 100% true. I actually believe this. I doubt ancient depictions when these guys are telling you all this stuff, that it's all imaginary. So let's say this particular guy here, he looks even a bit bigger than a typical Bigfoot. So let's say we'll give him 15 foot on him. Look at how fascinating this is. This cannot be, because it's an ancient depiction. See, these guys, this guy is making them all proper here, who's ever doing the drawing, right? So he's got all sort of they're in these sort of little thong-like sort of native-like things that they're wearing. But now look at this here, where you see he's on the right hand, on the left-hand foot, he's completely covered with fur. All of his whole foot, all the way up to the toes. On the other side, the dude is not, and he has more sort of way open. You notice that he's full fur covered on his arm and all this sort of stuff like this, but now up on the upper top, they don't have any hair on him, barely at all, but only a little bit on the right hand, or left hand arm. So what I'm getting at here is that I believe that this guy actually really did accurately do this, because nobody really, if you were just drawing an imagination or stuff from a story, why would you then specifically not color in these sorts of areas like this? Everybody normally would do uniformity. I mean, if the guy, if somebody tells you, oh, I saw a Bigfoot, and asks you to draw one, and you don't know what a Bigfoot looks like, and you say, well, he's a big furry man, he's completely covered in hair. Well, of course, then likely you would be then drawing it sort of on an imagination basis on this, but yet in this sort of thing here, they got very specific sort of stuff to him, where some parts of his body is not furry at all, and sort of much sort of stuff like this. So again, is it feasible that some of these offspring, even if they become a giant, might have been from a previous giant that went out there and sort of raped some lady or whatever and had some cave children, and some of them take the giant genes, so the guy comes out, but he may have some of the sort of other genes of the typical European that this giant might have raped or whatever, right? Or this kind of idea. So you can, because I don't believe that in ancient times somebody's going to sort of it makes no common sense why the guy's very accurate. If you notice, how the position of it and everything, because probably he was standing there and just like I told you, there was these people that would do this, and the guy would probably want to try and be accurate. Like, if you even notice the people's faces, their noses are different and sort of stuff like that. He made them sort of different looking. And if you notice, some of them even have haircuts like some of our characters today. Like that guy who's up there, he was the original punk rocker. He has the exact same haircut like a punk rocker of today. So these the punk rockers, everybody think they invented this stuff. There was guys massive eons ago with the same kind of hairdos, right? And like I've shown you in a lot of shows, all kidding aside, but I mean, in all these, I've shown you in a lot of shows that what people think is a modern invention is thousands of years old, and these dumb scientists, when they, Neanderthal man in the cave, and they found this guy. I mean, this stuff is complete hogwash. Humans come in massive variety of sort of shapes and sizes, and will carry on the genetic genes and the sort of stuff like this. Some are more furry than the next. Some might grow even an extra set of teeth and whatever weird stuff, and you may continue on this sort of stuff. But they try and make them all stupid and retarded, when obviously, so far as I've shown you, that cave people were able to hide amongst us in wild caves, and the only reason that they were killed off sometimes is because they're coming down to villages and eating people. Well, then people get pissed off and they and get battle back with them, like they did with this sort of giant like that. But otherwise, I mean, sort of like these things were out there, and sort of like nobody was really knowing that, you know what I mean, they're around much, except for people that they would have these sort of interactions with and sort of stuff like that. So, I mean, since ancient times, in all these different stuff, some of them, might have been bigger, ogre-like at one point, or whatever, but you can see here, like I said, it's very interesting, because I don't believe, like, I mean, if the guy was just getting a story about some giant hairy ogre man, you would have thought it would be conformity. I mean, why would he have this foot not covered with hair, but that one he does, and the arm stuff like this? But if it's true that this guy was a giant, but maybe an offspring of a previous giant that had children with a normal-sized human, let's say, well, he might have inherited some of these things, and where, like you saw in the natives previously, where only some parts of the body gets this sort of hair like that. If you notice these people, they don't have almost any hair on them or stuff like this, sort of stuff like this, yet this guy does, right? So another fascinating sort of thing to think about. Here, like, we'll do some of the early papers and stuff like this. I mean, a lot of people claim Bigfoot came along in the 50s. I mean, it's ridiculous here. Here's in Vermont. Now, Vermont does not get very many reports and stuff like that. The reason being is very simple. Vermont has probably about the lowest population nearly in the United States of any place. It's astonishing. The mass amount of wilderness in there where nobody goes into or nothing. And I mean, the hunters just barely go on the edge of the roads. They go a little bit into the forest, build a little, a bow sort of area or something to hunt a deer and that sort of stuff. But besides that, really, like, that's about it. But here, this newspaper article from back in 1879, there's some even in Europe you can find back as far as maybe the 1500s, maybe even some kind of stuff like that. But at least a bare minimum in the United States and stuff like this, at least like 1800s, where you can for sure correlate that it probably is a giant Bigfoot or human-like hairy man that they're talking about, sort of stuff. Now, here's a fascinating one from 1879. Cornell, Vermont, October 17th. Much excitement prevails among the sportsmen of the vicinity over the story that a wild man... See, now, even then, these guys, constantly, I find these in old stories, the wild man, and so this sort of stuff, no matter where, whether it's Europe or anywhere, they were all the same thing, where they were calling him a wild man quite often. So people don't find these stories and stuff like this because they used all kinds of weird terminologies in early papers. Sometimes they called them a cave beast man or these weird stuff, so you don't find them under Norda's titles. But there's tons of these sort of newspaper articles around. And it was seen on a Friday last by two young men while hunting in the mountains south of Williamstown. The young men described the creature as being about 5 feet high, resembling a man in form and movement, but covered all over with bright red hair and having a long straggly beard, and with very wild eyes. When first seen, the creature sprang from behind a rocky cliff and started for the woods nearby. When mistaking it for a bear or other wildlife, one of the men fired, and it is thought that it wounded it, for it started having fierce cries of pain and rage. It turned on it and started going at the assailants, driving them before it at high speed. They lost their guns and ammunition in the fight and dared not to return for fear of encountering the strange being. Then it mentions even much previous known about in the area. There is an old story told many years ago of a strange animal frequently seen along the range of the Green Mountains, resembling a man in appearance, but so wild that no one could approach him. Okay, so you find the same sort of stuff like this, and like I said, different variants and sizes and stuff. Now, this might have been a young sort of Bigfoot, hairy, sort of caveman-like guy, but it could have also been there's smaller ones of these, sort of, again, the same thing. It could be a small amount of them that were sort of smaller in this sort of area or whatever, right? Like this sort of stuff like this. And again, if you notice, this creature sort of tried to sort of like escape out quick, sort of stuff like this, because he's smaller, he's a wild man, sort of stuff like this. He knows that there's danger here. And you get this story time and time again where a lot of the Bigfoot will actually just take off or do different stuff like that, because many of them may not be cannibalistic or maybe sort of more timid or whatever, just like humans are. When you get 100 people born in a group, I mean, you're going to have 2 or 3 that are going to be insane, that are some kind of murder-like sort of characters, and 1 or 2 will probably be a rapist or some kind of thing. Another one will be a nut. Another guy will think he's sort of a Martian, and sort of stuff like this. And then you're going to have a lot of regular nice ones and super kind ones. Some are going to be mean and different stuff. So if they're wild humans or apes, the same thing. There's nice apes and mean apes, and the same thing. You find this with gorillas or any other. One gorilla was known to sort of hug their traders and stuff like this and give them a big kiss in the head and sort of stuff like that. So, some orangutans have been trained to do all kinds of wild and stuff like this, but then another one might sort of attack at you. So the same thing would apply. It doesn't matter whether they're human, a real ape-man sort of ape, or anything sort of, any variants of this. They all behave in the same sort of fashions. Either they're going to be cannibalistic and mean, or they're going to evade you, or they're going to do stuff like this. And this sort of the same exact sort of reports, no matter what the behavior, whether the guy's 5 feet tall or 15 feet tall, it's the same sort of thing. Here we have even in, as I said, I've shown this in my other one here. There's our Mayor Watson there. He's interviewing Sasquatch. Stuff like even in our region, Ottawa. We had there on the Prentice Island, there was a sort of ancient sort of caveman monster guy living there. And this guy, there were several different stories of this, but back in 1883, these guys have been on this island and sort of stuff like this. It was thought that he might have been actually shot and killed or whatever, but depending on the story, I read across a couple of articles about this. So depending on the one guy claimed that he had a tomahawk on the club. Another one said something about some kind of Viking-like hat. There was this side story and stuff like this. But nevertheless, it sounds like a giant, hairy, sort of 8-foot-plus human, sort of that is primitive here, that was living even in a cave in Ontario here. I'm surprised somebody hasn't actually, I mean, me personally, I would actually sort of, if I had sort of a bit of time to do this or something like this, I've always wondered, I mean, possibly you might be able to go to this cave if, let's say the story's true. And what if they actually were successful in shooting this thing or whatever, and let's say this thing died, or he just died of old age later or whatever? It's very feasible in this cave sort of thing here that possibly this body might actually exist, a part of it or something. And stuff like this. So that's a fascinating sort of thing. Like, I mean, a lot of people will take these just as some fanciful thing, but I've shown you time and time again that actually there's real reality to these, at least some of them, and sort of stuff like this. So, I mean, since this story is sort of very similar to a typical one that you're getting of the natives being attacked or this and that sort of stuff, it's very feasible that this one also could be sort of true, that there was some kind of big, hairy, sort of wild human living on British Island, or maybe a few of them, sort of stuff like this. And this is, like I said again, worldwide, and of course, just like humans are worldwide, and some, just like humans, might want to explore more and stuff like that. So I'm sure there's been the odd Bigfoot some morning. He's born, it's a new Bigfoot, and he's not like his parents. He's a bit smarter, and he designs some kind of shoe for his feet. And or he decides that he doesn't like this area and he wants to go to some new sort of area. So piss on you, parents! I'm taking off. I'm heading the highway. I'm going to go for new adventures, right? So now this guy goes into sort of the next caving system, 100 miles away, and there's a local village near there, and he sees Big Gertrude, and she makes a sort of fancy to him. He finds her sort of attractive, so he grabs her. Of course, Big Gertrude can't sort of argue with this giant ape-man sort of thing, right? And so then he sort of has these children with her. She even starts becoming sort of half crazy and stuff over time. I mean, that would be pretty disgusting, this big hairy ape-man raping her every day and that sort of stuff. So I imagine probably it would be a terrifying sort of thing, and she might over time sort of even lose her mind herself, sort of stuff like this. So her children, of course, wouldn't know any of this because the guy doesn't speak English or any sort of language here, and this sort of stuff like this, and these sort of things. So, and she'd be probably so petrified all the time, she probably wouldn't want to be speaking to get his attention, because then he might jump on her again, sort of thing, right? So she'd be busy taking care of these children. And then she might have released some of them sometimes, and sort of because she still loves them, it's still her children. A mother's instinct's very strong, right? And even these women, they might have realized that this guy really is a human, but he's just like a big furry ape-man sort of thing. They may sort of they might have reacted differently to that. They'd be disgusted, but they'd want their children to survive because they realize that he really is a human and that their children is, human, sort of like that, right? So, some of these people might have escaped or were let loose by the parent, one of the parents that was not the Bigfoot sort of person, right? And this sort of thing, and then they, of course, they might spread to a new place and do the same sort of behavior. So you can imagine over thousands of years here of this same typical sort of stuff occurring, that you actually could get populations of early humans doing these weird sort of stuff like this by these strange sort of events, right? Sort of stuff like that. So these are fascinating things, but really, as you can see so far, that really there is an actual sort of at least unequivocal proof that you can even go see in museums and stuff like this, that yes, very large people have existed. Yes, quite often they're furry. Yes, quite often they live in cave systems, and yes, they hide from people and kill them sometimes and do all kinds of behaviors like this. So, again, here we go. We're right back to the same thing where, yes, it's very feasible that no matter what you want to call Bigfoot really is a combination of all these things. So yes, a Bigfoot-like thing does exist, no matter what anybody sort of states one way or the other. Now, I covered on shows other articles from papers from many states, from Ohio to Florida, and some go back as early as the 1700s. Many always the same: wild man lives in cave, okay, or forest, and giant with long arms and covered in hair and tall to smelly. Some running on all fours like a chimp, or doing both. Due to there's much more to cover yet. If you want a large list of them, then you can check out my other Sasquatch sort of videos and stuff like that. I didn't want to go through 5 million of these because I've already shown this in other sort of shows, and I don't want to repeat sort of like. I tried to sort of keep this slightly different than my previous ones, sort of and stuff like this, right? Now, footprints. Now, out of all of this sort of stuff, the next thing that you have besides actual physical skulls of giants that are still around that we can look at, the main sort of stuff here is the tracks. And this sort of stuff. Obviously, somebody leaves tracks. Okay. There's fossilized tracks, so you can't say that, you know what I mean, some guy in the 50s came up with a wooden foot and somehow was, making fossilized tracks from thousands of years ago or whatever, this kinds of stuff. And so these giant footprints, be it today to ancient times, have been around. And sort of stuff like this. So yes, there has been modern people, some that have tried to sort of make fake footprints and all this kind of stuff to keep the Bigfoot action going and that sort of stuff, and that's all fine. But that has no relevance of the proof of real ones where actually, yes, these things are actually real, and there is giants of some sort, somebody made them, and they leave them there. And this sort of stuff. So again, you actually have like a physical sort of an evidence sort of a thing you can look at. And tracks are quite important. I mean, to me, scientifically, if other scientists actually understood like anthropology sort of science, like if they understood how feet work and all this sort of stuff, like Jeff Milgram sort of does, or stuff like this, then if these guys had this kind of knowledge, they wouldn't be as skeptical, because they would see that there's some things that are just not sort of like, I mean, they're beyond sort of like the point of anything that where fakers could do this sort of, like in today's time that's possible. But in previous times, no, and since there's 5 million of these laying around, then that shows that guaranteed at least some of them in the past had to have been of real giant humans or some great ape that was walking amongst us and stuff like this. Now, the earliest reports back in Canada, you can find a Canadian explorer that I know of that mentions prints, was by the explorer David Thompson in 1811. He was going through an area that nears what is now Jasper, Alberta, which I've been down there, quite a nice area, with his guides, and he came upon a set of tracks measuring 14 inches long. They looked like the footprint of a huge man, however, much wider and no claws. The native guides were sure it was not a bear, and sort of kind of said that it was probably a wild man sort of thing. The real start, though, of footprints craze have to go with the Jerry Crew construction gang finding prints that made national headlines and stuff like this. And of course, there was people out there doing these sort of fake sort of things with the wooden feet and stuff like this, trying to keep this crazy and going sort of more further. But the actual footprints being mentioned and even found way before this is by many, right? And this sort of stuff. Now here's my old friend here, Mr. Rennie DeHun here, with the phosphor crystal prints, which I actually examined. I looked underneath a microscope on them. Not too many people have gotten to look at these, actually, the real sort of one, but I did way back in the 70s, I was talking to a scientist that was sent one here in our region. He was sent to examine it. So I got in touch with him and stuff like that. He was nice enough to allow me to sort of, I used to have a picture of me holding it, and sadly it's been lost over the years and stuff like this. But I discussed this with Reddy and Grover Krantz and John Green and different ones over the years about this sort of Bosford cripple print. And I used to talk to Ivan Marks a lot, okay, who was the guy that sort of found this, one of them that was in the group and stuff like this. And I looked underneath it and stuff like this, and there was some interesting sort of stuff in it. I didn't see these dermal ridges like sort of stuff, but I see a lot of weird sort of stuff to it where it sort of was very interesting and not likely a typical sort of wooden foot here would have done this or any of this sort of stuff and sort of stuff like this. But what would happen was is that this Bigfoot was actually crippled. And what was interesting is that there's these different anthropologists looked at this, and this Grover Krantz and stuff like this, and he had figured out exactly all the bone structures and where they sort of been and all this sort of stuff. So for this Ivan Marks guy to have been this genius quick that he was with a group, they follow these Sasquatch sort of tracks through the wilderness, and then they find this new set of tracks and sort of stuff like this. And this guy in 2 seconds to be able to create this sort of giant track with these anatomical bizarre features to it seems very unlikely. Now, I do know, though, however, that Ivan Marks then made this documentary about Bigfoot. He then mysteriously had all kinds of wonderful films, including the so-called Bosford crippled sort of Sasquatch, which, because knowing this guy and knowing his sort of, and talking to him quite a bit, and stuff like this, I won't comment on his films at all, or about his wife, or any of these kinds of stuff like this, but we'll forget about the films of them. But I do suspect that the Bosford cripple print, after examining it myself and stuff like that, seemed to be very bizarre for a person back in those days, especially, to have such a creative mind. In today's time, I'd be a bit more suspicious of these things, but back then, I doubt very much, talking to Ivan Marks quite often and stuff like this, that actually he was a fantastic tracker. This guy could hunt down cougars and all kinds of stuff, and he really knew his animal life, wildlife quite good and all that sort of stuff like that. But as far as that sort of stuff goes, I doubt very much that he would have sort of been able to sort of pull this off. So, what really happened was very simple. There was a group out there, and what I believe is that when they found these tracks like this, Ivan, being the sort of promoter-like guy that he is, sort of took advantage of this and said, okay, well, now we found this Bosford cripple print and everybody's going nuts over it. What else can we so let's have a Bigfoot show now and this sort of stuff like this. So, but I don't believe that he actually faked the Bosford cripple print or any of that, because he was actually with a group. They didn't even sort of know where anybody was going or anything. From all the research on it and stuff and talking to him, I don't believe that he faked that. So, but I do know that after that, his movies and all this sort of stuff, that's a whole different world. But the original sort of footprint, Dr. Grover Krantz, different ones have analyzed this quite a few times. And this guy would have had to know exactly where to position the stuff if a break would occur and all these weird sort of stuff. It doesn't seem very likely. And you have to have a pretty weird mind to be sort of like, you know what I mean, you make one foot crippled and he's got photo and the other one normal and all this kind of like, it sounds like a lot of stuff to go through for nothing, right? Sort of stuff like that. So I can't really 100% guarantee you that the Bosford cripple print was real, but from knowing these people and sort of and looking at it, and I could see dips and pores in it and weird stuff. It could not have been if it was a fake footprint, it certainly wasn't made by a wooden shoe like thing. it had to have been done much more sort of a trickery here, where the guy really knew what he was doing. Sort of stuff with very fascinating materials that wouldn't have existed much even in those times, right? So, I kind of believe, after looking at it, holding it in my hand and that sort of stuff like that it was authentic. But any other evidence surrounding the Bosford cripple print of movies or any other stuff, well, that's I'll leave that alone. Just because I liked Ivan Marx and sort of stuff like that. But anyways, if you haven't seen his old movie there, it's quite entertaining. It's sort of I suppose my funniest part I loved of that sort of his documentary is he says. Something like this. It wasn't exactly, but it's so many years ago. I haven't seen this since the 70s, but it was pretty funny. It was he's got on it. He says, "I had no conclusion, but I felt that Bigfoot must be going to Alaska." So all of a sudden, like this, everything was like that. Like he just instantly somehow now he's in Alaska hunting for Bigfoot. He must be there, and he says. And then I saw the giant glowing eyes of Bigfoot like this, right? And then he says, "Oh no, just it was a moose." Right? So I mean, the whole documentary is extremely sort of entertaining, including one Bigfoot that he filmed where it actually pops its arms like Hulk Hogan and is doing a pose, right? Or Arnold Schwarzenegger and stuff like that. So pretty entertaining anyway. So I won't comment on the validity of these Bigfoot that are seen throughout the movie. But but I will state that no matter what, he was a nice, likable, sort of entertaining guy. I enjoyed him and talked to him quite a few times and sort of stuff like this. And that's all I can say. But I suspect that he just simply was with the right group. They did find this probably real Bosford crippled Sasquatch. And sort of stuff like this, but he was just a smart man and continued on with the show, sort of thing. Is pretty well about what I suspect of that. Now, here's the thing. Since ancient times, mentions of giant footprints by early explorers such as David Thompson is mentioned, that sort of stuff like this. Above here is, actually that's a misprint there. I was meant to talk about some other person who, I can't even remember who that was now. But David Thompson already covered those tracks for 14. There was another, a really older tracks that was found, and the guy mentions they were like 18 inches plus long and stuff like that. And but for the life of me, I don't remember there's so many of these accounts like this. But anyways, that was a misprint in there. Above here is the Patterson print, though, okay? Now, look at the astonishing great depth in that sort of ground, okay? Some prints were tested to see how much weight it would have taken to sink that deep in the ground, and some were found to be the estimates at least over 1,000 pounds, indicating could not be a normal human, with some estimating it at over 2,000 pounds. Okay? Most people think Sasquatch prints were started by fakers in modern times. Yes, some are, for sure, fake. However, some of them found could not be likely. Some have dermal ridges, including the Patterson tracks. Okay? So dermal ridges are like fingerprints. Okay? And you can't sort of like... especially in the 1960s, there'd be no feasible sort of fake rubbers or any kind of weird stuff that you could do that could have sort of done such a thing. As well, then you would have to state that Roger Patterson was such a genius that before the word dermal ridges was ever even mentioned in a Bigfoot-like thing or anything, that somehow he made a suit, put dermal ridges in it, and was hoping in the future that somebody, footprint experts, would then study it and see how real it is by his mighty sort of wizardry, right? You see how ridiculous that sort of sounds, right? So the FBI actually have like handprints, footprints of different ones, including this Patterson film that we're going to cover here in a bit, that actually had these sort of dermal ridges in them. And these are like fingerprints, and these are the highest sort of degree guys in the FBI, and they're quite clearly telling you they're not fake, and that they are sort of a print of some kind of like human-like sort of a thing, but different from typical humans here. Right? As you can clearly see this Patterson film up here, print, sort of stuff like that. Now, another thing that I wanted to mention is I have been, ever since I've been reading Sasquatch, the earliest books ever printed about Sasquatch and stuff like this, I've read pretty well all the early ones that there ever was made. Everything from Roger himself wrote one, Abominable Snowman in America and stuff like that, to Ivan Sandler, all the gang. I've read every sort of those early sort of guys that was into this sort of stuff, Bernard and all the gang. And this sort of a thing, but the thing is that I've done a lot of research for decades since I was a kid, and I was always fascinated by also that I found that gorillas looked a lot like Bigfoot. So one of my thoughts was that before even I had ever heard when I was really small of what a gigantopithecus was at first, I sort of, the first early things I just thought that maybe he might be a giant upright standing sort of gorilla sort of idea. This is one of the sort of ideas that I had besides a giant human. And I started researching, I was just curious, like about how big gorillas get and all these kinds of stuff like this. And sometimes I would get sort of different ones here where I found some that there was even some gorillas slightly over 6 feet tall, and including one that was over 1,000 pounds. Okay? So my belief is that people have been underestimating the weight of Bigfoot, giant man, whatever it is, since we've ever been doing this sort of stuff like this, because if you're a human and you're sort of walking along and like even Glenn and Willie, as I mentioned in my other one about my first Sasquatch interview that I ever done, where I got a story, and I was only just like 5 years of age at the time, right? So sort of stuff like this, where I had already been doing ones on the lake monsters and stuff like this, but I mean, I was just starting Ron Blythe at the time, and sort of stuff like this, when I collected this story from this Glenn and Willie and stuff like this. And their estimate that the same thing, they thought it weighed like maybe 400 or 500 pounds sort of idea like that, because he said that it was at least about twice the size of them. So the idea is that humans, every person, we're going about it sort of like where we, oh yeah, the guy, he was like 7 feet tall, he was at least 2 feet taller than me, and he had these big wide shoulders. So most people sort of are guessing in their mind, they sort of double sort of the size of what they think by what a person would sort of weigh, the estimate of what the weight is. And researchers do this, everybody. I noticed this in all the reports that the guy says, oh, he thought it weighed like 400 or 500 pounds, like as if that's big. I suggested none of these creatures weigh remotely that small. Maybe a baby ones do, smaller, but any sort of decent sized ones from 6 foot plus are much larger than gorillas and much more even muscular, therefore should even weigh more. If you look at any great apes, depending on the size of the great ape, they weigh more and more, depending on the one, right? And so the fact is that 100% guaranteed fact, there is gorilla skulls that where the gorilla made it to 6 feet at least. Okay, so that's not very much different than a regular Bigfoot-like report. You get another foot here or two, as sort of thing, and at least 1,000 pounds here. So think about that. If a regular Bigfoot is like 8 feet tall and a bit wider and sort of stuff like this, it probably is highly correct that these creatures weigh like maybe 12, 14, 1,500, maybe possibly even 2,000 pounds, just like occasionally you get moose reports and stuff like that. So I believe thoroughly that all researchers pretty well, and all these kinds of people that are doing this sort of stuff, are much, much underestimating the weight of truly what these things are in typical. because their bone mass ratio and stuff like that must be very different than ours, and this sort of stuff, and also 10 times stronger than us, bare minimum. And I would suggest that these wild humans / Bigfoot, whatever it is, right, sort of thing, they sort of have quite the big sort of statured ones have probably like great mass and strength to them, and sort of can sort of sink these sort of weights like that. And so it could be that sometimes they're skinny, starving Sasquatch, where they're wild people, where the guy should weigh something like 1,000 pounds, but he only weighs like 300 or 400 because he's a skinny sort of Ethiopian sort of a guy there where he's not getting much sort of food, right? So that would be very sort of feasible, sort of the same thing where there'd be variances to this. But I think a lot of sort of people that when they get these reports and the lady says, oh, it must have been like 500 pounds, and really that's just what she sort of envisions in her mind, but she doesn't understand, or whoever the witness would be, that if you analyze this compared to other animals at a smaller height and not even the same width that weigh much, much more, then obviously likely these Sasquatch do as well, and that sort of stuff. Now, footprints, again, look at this one here. Okay. To me, personally, I don't believe this is a real Bigfoot footprint at all. This looks like a normal sort of wooden leg sort of stuff, where a person maybe sort of not really even too much of an effort involvement here, sort of a basic foot, sort of thing like this, and cut it out of wood or some kind of thing like this, and away you went. Because this is a plaster cast of it. Notice there's nothing. It's all perfectly flat. Right? You see what I mean? Like sort of stuff like this, because that's when you get with wood, right? You're going to be sort of shaving it down and making the shape and stuff like this, and that sort of stuff like that, okay? But prints are found in all different sizes, from children with wide feet types to giant prints over 20 inches or more sometimes. Some have been up to like 23.5, 24 inches, a few of them, stuff like that. But typically most of them are, I'd say, between the 16 to 18 inch sort of range is about typical, probably, of most of the ones that I've ever been sent through, stuff like that. But there's certainly enough small ones out there where they have the wide sort of feet like that, or some kind of variance like that. So, other sort of stuff like that is sometimes you find like in these roads and stuff like this, these footprints in the most remotest sort of areas with giant, like the thing's got 7-8 foot strides on it and a depth of sometimes like 3 inches in the ground, yet people walking right by can't even get 1/10 of an inch in the ground. Well, then again proves that likely sort of like it can't be a human. And sort of, and even if the guy had a fake wooden foot, it would take even way more weight to sink in the ground that deep, not less. Because the more sort of that width that you have and sort of stuff like that, right? So, fake wooden prints, like I said, to me, most I can tell, like I'm not an expert like Mr. Mulderman and stuff like that, but I can certainly, like looking at this one, in the highest probability, I don't believe this to be authentic. Even the person that found it, maybe they fully believe this, they found this track or whatever, but I think this was placed by a forger, and it was made with a sort of a wooden flip sort of thing. Now, but here's, now here, we'll put the two together here. Okay. Here's the one that was found in the 1980s there in Gray Harbor area. Okay. Now, look at the difference between this plaster cast and that. Okay? See the different toe movements as the guy was propelling himself, or her, or whatever, right? And you can see the shapes of the toes. Some have like little divots in them where it had actually pressed in, propelling the dirt away from its toe, and the stuff like this. You can see micro pores through the thing, indicating a living like creature here. Each print is actually different where the toes move and the different sorts of stuff like this. This is more believable to me because anybody, especially even in the 80s, I mean, they barely even came up with the sort of Hulk Hogan-like stretch stuff and some of these stuff until even the 90s, some of these sorts of like weird sort of materials. So even back in earlier times like that, not even massive eons ago, it would have been much more difficult. Nowadays, you could probably get away with this a little bit better with these wild sort of substances we have to make molds and weird stuff like that to make a more convincing print. But especially in earlier times, like the Patterson ones and all these different ones, where you have each track, the thing's actually moving, his toes change, you can see where he's propelling himself and stuff like this. It cannot be a wooden foot anymore. This is actually some real sort of giant person or ape that is walking along, making different sort of movements and stuff like this. And some of these tracks, they actually tried to get machines after and putting weights down and stuff like that to penetrate into the ground. And some that took well over 1,000 pounds to equal a similar depth as some of these tracks and stuff like this. So then with the flat sort of fake wooden feet ones, you'll see always that these kinds of tracks are usually just barely in the ground. Because the person running who's trying to jump and stuff like this, some of them will try and do it when the ground's muddy and stuff to get a bit more depth, but eventually the muddy ground it becomes harder underneath sort of stuff like this, and this sort of stuff like this. And because each print, when you look at it, there's no toe movements, there's no sort of, like I said here, you see no sort of pores in the sort of feet of the sort of thing. The toes, the same thing, are all perfectly sort of flat, uniformish, like sort of perfectly like a carved out sort of thing. So El Fakerulo. But this one here is so lifelike, the toe-ish sort of stuff and the different variants. They're not even sort of like, just like humans. I mean, some guys got an odd toe shape here and there and all this sort of weird stuff. You can see the cuts in the areas where he's lifted up. Stepping on, he's actually crushing into sort of branches and sort of weird little stuff you can see stuck in grasses and stuff like this. So I would think much higher probability that that's a real sort of print by either a real giant human or ape man or both or whatever the case, right? We're still on this fence of this sort of part, but nevertheless, that to me is much more likely a real print compared to that one, sort of thing like that. So I'm not going to go a massive amount into that sort of thing like that. If you want to know much more about sort of like the footprints like evidence, I'd suggest you sort of like, check out sort of Jeff Mulgrim's work. He looks like a very nice, intelligent man. I'd like to meet him someday and see his collection and stuff like that. I would just be totally enthralled with that to see some of these and look under a microscope on them and stuff like that. Because I have studied from him and different ones out there, and Grover Prince we used to talk to and stuff like that, to try and learn fakes from not fakes, but I wouldn't consider myself like a good enough authority. I haven't been out on, like I said, I did researching for them in Florida, looking for footprints. I did actually find a footprints once, but this was by accident and sort of stuff like that. And I did go and investigate a few times, people calling out for this sort of footprints and stuff like that. So I have looked at some, but I certainly have not done the sort of research as much that way. I've done more for the Sasquatch phenomena, sort of in talking and interviewing and going out in sort of the woods and stuff, but not ever sort of like giant sort of ones like what typical most Bigfoot researchers do, where they're out in the forest all the time looking for this and looking for prints and stuff like that. I've done that on the lake side for lake monsters, which I'll talk about another time, but for the Bigfoot sort of phenomena, no. And sort of stuff like this. But so now the bottom line with that, I guess what I'm trying to say is that there's tons of tracks like what I showed you there, where there's a lot to them. And some of them were fascinating, where people were sent in tracks like that collect this sort of stuff, where a guy in the 1950s, they didn't know this, had a print in his collection that matches now a print that was found in the 1990s in a different area, sometimes hundreds of miles away from the original find. And by accident, when they're looking through them, the guy says, hey, geez, that foot looks exactly like that one. They put them under a microscope, it's the same. So what would be the odds that even in the 1950s and 60s, that when we didn't have any of these technologies and stuff like this, dermal ridges, all this sort of stuff would be able to show up in a print from the 1950s or 60s, and then one in the 1990s or 80s where, this guy the speaker would have had to keep this for massive eons that he created way back then and reintroduce it occasionally. I mean, seriously, that's not sort of believable at all. But it would be very believable if it actually did truly belong to a giant human. And giant humans, or like any other sort of animals, traverse around and walk different areas and do stuff. So maybe years later he had to move from one forest area to the next, and now this same print was found by somebody else, sort of thing like that. So here's a buddy, the sort of more abominable snowman sort of guys there, where it's a real sort of a cool, sort of much more climate here and stuff like this. And so now we're going to be talking about weird other sort of evidence to support this wild man-like sort of Bigfoot-like thing that, yes, does live amongst us, by showing you the amount of massive sort of like weird vanishings and sort of odd sort of things that are going around in our national parks yearly and stuff like this that totally correlate with the same native sort of tales. And since, like I said, with the Lovelock Cave and stuff like this, we've actually been able to prove the tale is real, well then who's to say that the rest of these aren't either, sort of stuff like this. So we're going to go on about some of these sort of like killings and different sort of weird stuff about this sort of stuff. So the first one that I wanted to cover was about the first one I want to cover here is about the Dilato Pass. Now, to correlate this sort of story always that these wild men from the woods might come out from the cave occasionally and they're cannibalistic and kill somebody or this kind of stuff. A excellent sort of story that, I mean, if you go through, and we're going to cover this now, the Dilato Pass incident in the 1950s, okay? These 9 students went to the Ural Mountains, aka the Mountains of the Dead, okay, on an expedition camping ski sort of adventure, right? Now, the young people, including their leader, and all were experienced outdoor campers and stuff like this. And sadly, it was a cold time of year and stuff like that, but nevertheless, they were experts at that, and they wanted to sort of test their skills and these sort of stuff. And well, lucky for him, I suppose, but I mean, it's, I know this man felt really bad about this, sort of in some ways a guilt-like thing, because, he left his comrades out there sort of thing, but he was really sick, the leader, and he had to leave Uri. So he went home, and the rest soon then, sadly after, all died. Now, according to records, here's what happened. Basically, the tent was found by rescuers, okay, when they were sent out to look after that they did not return. And they were camping on this sort of some area in these Ural Mountains, and it was thought that someone might have been there earlier due to that they found a KGB item left at the scene. So when the first rescuers came looking for these people, when they had vanished and stuff like that, then they found this one item there that looked like as if somebody came possibly from a helicopter, maybe, had landed, and then checked out the sort of spot and took off. So the KGB certainly didn't do the killings or weren't walking around because their footprints weren't found anywhere, but that sort of thing. But they did find this little thing, and of course the KGB might be able to get out to this rescue area quicker than what the rescuers would have done and stuff like that. But according to the records when the rescuers first got there, they found that the group's tent was found that there was some slits in them. Okay? In sort of like across, there's sort of like each sort of the whole tent had these slits that were cut from the inside, so that, and they were positioned at every area around the forest that was around them. Like as if you'd be peeking through it, watching, waiting for something and stuff like that, right? Now, the rescuers not only found this tent abandoned there, but much of the students' clothes, indicating that they had to run out naked to escape this terror. Okay, so they actually found them, like most of them, naked later or partially clothes and stuff like this, and this sort of thing. That's because whatever caused them to leave, they ran in fear and terror out of their tent as sort of very quickly. And can you imagine in the freezing cold like that, that you were so scared of something that you cut your only life supply to keep you a little bit warmer? And of course, this would be normal. It's taught to you to sort of take your clothing off and stuff like that to insulate human body heat and that sort of stuff like that. So they probably would have done that sort of a thing, and that would make sense sort of like this. Now, all kinds of people put theories from everything from space aliens took them to local people killed them, but this doesn't sort of point to the evidence at all who the culprit is. And the culprit, to me, 100%, I'm completely convinced of this, it was a giant wild man, an Alma, Yeti, whatever you want to call it, right? The rescuers found the tent oddly had slits, like I was mentioning there, all through the sort of thing, facing the different areas of forest. This is the first clue. Only someone fearing something around them would freeze on purpose and ruin their tent. Right? Like, I mean, nobody's going to do this, cut big holes in and stuff like that, unless you really were petrified and watching, looking for some kind of enemy. Next, the rescuers actually found inside the tent a tiny torn piece of paper. It was just a small little scribble of paper where this guy had nothing, and it had written on it, written in Russian language, it says on it, "The snowman lives." Okay, so although many people put other theories, I don't see how any person could sort of, think about this. You're inside this tent, and 9 of you end up getting killed here, sort of stuff quite quickly by some ferocious sort of thing, and this sort of stuff. Why on earth, when you're running out of a tent for your life and stuff like that, would you take the time to write on a piece of paper, you know what I mean, the snowman lives for something to do? You would do that, though, if you actually, this is what you were seeing, and you want the guilty perpetrator to be caught later. So this kid was smart. He's seen the thing coming. He wrote down quickly to, if rescuers come and stuff like this, that they had an idea of what might have happened to these people, okay? So this is like a sort of a thing that very few people, when you see this dilative sort of stuff, almost nobody goes on about this sort of aspect of it. They try and make it sound like some other weird, mysterious thing, when really all the evidence only points to one conclusion, really, that it was a wild man that did this. And you'll see this. Okay, like the next important clue was giant footprints. They were over 20 inches long, okay, of seemingly human-like prints. They took photos of them, the rescuers, and these prints followed the students to each place that they were found dead after, indicating, right, since no other prints were around, that whatever was following them killed them. Okay? And so this guy, they find giant human barefoot footprints, over 20 inches long. They're following the different people in each spot, and then you find them damaged and murdered in different sort of ways, or frozen to death from trying to hide from them. And each time you find sort of like continuing on this, the only thing that was following them, there was no other human footprints found except these people and this giant sort of footprints, right? So, I mean, you got to sort of like imagine now that it must have been something else. I mean, obviously some large sort of creature here is walking upright like a human with 2 feet. He has giant human feet, sort of not a bear's, and he's walking on 2 feet and he's following them. Okay, so, I mean, seriously, like, where on earth would some guy in the 1950s, why would some guy secretly follow out some sort of group out there, somehow get on a giant suit here and be able, or that he has the biggest feet on earth, 20-some inches long, yet he runs around out in the forest sort of and is able to physically beat up and kill 9 people without a blink of an eye sort of thing, with no guns on him or any sort of stuff like this. If it had been, like they said, native people around there and stuff like this, these people, you would have found footprints of them coming up. You would have also found that likely, I mean, why would these people start doing these terrorist stuff that we're going to talk about, that how they killed some of these people were killed? They would have used the gun. They would have walked up to the place and said, "Unga bunga wunga," or whatever. Yeah, you know, even if they couldn't speak English, they would have sort of said, "Get out of like this." So the people would have came out. They wouldn't run now because the guy's pointing a gun at them. There's no trapper in the world that would go out in areas like that without a gun. I mean, there's bears and different stuff, right? So, I mean, no hunter, no anybody back in those days or any day would be out there without sort of guns. So, whoever, whatever this thing was, could not have been some kind of normal humans here in this sort of way, because normally people would have sort of like, even if it was some kind of capture and stuff like that, you would have found other footprints, the guy would have shot you, or even if you were boxing with him, it's hard to believe that one guy with giant footprints here would be able to take on sort of all these people and sort of like, and why would people run out naked if the guy comes up and says, "Hey, get out of the tent," or screaming at you? You'd think that the women would have at least tried to clothe themselves and stuff like this. But you would run for your life if some kind of 9-10 foot sort of giant monster, hairy humanoid is growling now at your tent. That's different, because that's the unknown. It's not a human you're dealing with, even though he may be a wild human. Your fear, I mean, I'd be the same thing. I want to run for my life. I mean, I know in my mind that this thing could swing at me once and probably kill me in a second, right? So, I mean, the different sort of damages that was found on these people, some of them tried to climb up trees and stuff like that. But imagine you're up there trying to run and you're naked out in the tree. Who would do this? But you would do it if some giant sort of goon is after you and trying to kill you and stuff like that. One of the ladies, poor Ludmilla there, she was a very pretty girl, so nice catch whoever she was dating, sort of a thing, and sort of this one of the victims, Ludmilla, and I mean, one of the ladies had her tongue ripped out and the other one eyeballs ripped out, okay? And great apes are the only sort of ones that could be able to do that, or a human. Bears cannot stick, they don't have a hand that would be able to practically possibly get in their mouth with the sort of right sort of mandible sort of hand here to sort of grab onto the sort of stuff, right? But a great ape could do this, or a giant human would be able to do this sort of stuff. And this is a common sort of occurrence since ancient times, the same thing of reports of people finding their cows to different animals sort of with a tongue ripped out, or humans being found dead with their tongue ripped out in these same sort of Russian areas and stuff like that. So also correlating that this may be a sort of a habit of some of these sort of wild people, right? Because they're cannibalistic, some of them. Okay, so some were found with scars on their hands and face, seemingly trying to punch the creature in defense, but were quickly subdued. The ribs on one was so damaged that the coroner said that no human on earth could have inflicted these wounds. So even if the guy had a bat and started swinging at you, he couldn't cause the damage of what this thing did. Sort of stuff like this. They still, it's an unsolved sort of a thing according to them, like sort of, but they probably know the truth, but for the way they put it, they just put on it, they died of a mysterious natural force. So they're telling you the truth. The natural force was a giant, either killer, sort of a cannibalistic, hairy, wild human, or a sort of great ape. But it doesn't matter. Bottom line is that some giant sort of ape-man sort of thing probably is the killer here. The rest were found frozen in a kneel-like position, seemingly trying to hide in the snow to avoid the creature, but died likely of the cold. So not all of them the creature got, but they all died because of this sort of a thing, right? So even though the creature didn't kill them all, for sure it was the cause of their demise. And I mean, same thing, I'd probably try and do that too. You could hide yourself in a snowbank, like dig a hole, sort of hope that you could sort of, seals are known to do this and stuff like that. And you wouldn't believe it, but you can actually go by like a snowbank on a lake, or in the ocean and stuff like this in some areas and things like this, and a seal can actually hide inside of this sort of thing and you won't even see them. They're completely, they actually get the snow to completely cover them again, and all they have is a tiny little micro breathing hole. So any person even 10 feet away would never even notice this breathing hole or see anything, and it would just look like a snowbank. Sort of stuff like that. So these guys sort of obviously thought up to do something like that, probably quickly sort of tried to hide themselves, sort of thing, but they actually died of just, frozen solid. But can you imagine being so scared that you're hiding like this in this crouched position and dying, slowly dying here, yet you won't even leave to try and keep yourself warm and jump up or do anything. You freeze to death instead because you're so petrified, right? So this is true. What that force was terrifying to these people. I mean, everything indicates about it being scared of a giant animal here, not of somebody with guns or weird stuff like this. I mean, it's a very different sort of a thing. Yeah, people are scared and they would hide and do weird stuff like this, but if it was a people with guns or a normal hunter and stuff like this, they would have shot the guy, they would have done different sort of stuff like this. And all, again, since you find his 20-inch plus footprints following them, well, it's pretty hard to sort of like, come to much of another sort of conclusion here, whether people want to believe in such things exist or not. I've shown you so far that there's physical evidence of them. So yes, they do, and sort of thing like that. So very likely this is actually what occurred here. And a most terrifying sort of thing, but just goes to show that some of them, especially in a region like that, might be cannibalistic because the food level is very low. Like I was saying there about Linilla and stuff like that. She was one of the victims there. Had her tongue ripped out, but I suspect probably she might have been screaming, sort of like, you'd be all in fear and stuff like this, and probably this man got pissed off, shut up, sort of thing like this, like some bullies will, sort of stuff like that, and probably decided to sort of then shut her up completely, sort of idea. And again, human-like intelligence here, where that sort of thing. There's still a vigil every year for the victims. Now, the main thing why, to me, there is no other answer than, yes, these people really were killed by a wild man, was the fact that they actually photographed it. One researcher went to the Kremlin and got the negative showing it's actually authentic. The last few photos taken by the expedition of these kids before they got murdered, one shows a giant hairy man beast by a tree, and I'll show you that in a second. Anyone thinking fraud-like things, remember this is the 1950s, okay? So there's no CGI back then. There's none of this sort of weird stuff like that existed. as well as there was no real suits like this of what you're sort of going to see in this sort of like this. And even if there was, who on earth, where would this guy, this is massive, like days to get into this sort of area through the most freezing -50 at night sort of stuff here, okay? Who would get this costume on and then sort of go all the way out into this giant forest to hunt these kids down and murder them all? Would you not think that once the kids got close and the guys in this sort of suit, that they would have realized it's a guy in a suit? I mean, any Bigfoot fake film I see instantly, I know it's a guy in a suit, and a gorilla suit or Mighty Joe Young or any of this sort of stuff I've looked at, I can quite clearly tell it's really not a gorilla or any sort of stuff like that. So I'm pretty doubtful that you would get these students to be that petrified. Yeah, the guy might scare them in the dark, coming up with the tent or something for a second, but once you made a punch at him or two, and the guy wouldn't be able to fight you very well in this ridiculous suit and stuff like this. So, I mean, this is another thing is then you either have the possibility that, yes, this really is the Bigfoot monster that killed them that we're going to see here in a minute, or that some nut was actually running around in a suit out there killing people. And I mean, come on, seriously, like, I mean, really, that's even more unbelievable that some guy be able to traverse through these giant woods here by himself in a ridiculous sort of a Bigfoot suit and be able to fool everybody and fight with you and kill you all with no gun on him or anything and sort of stuff like this. And also this guy must have been one giant dude, because in order to wear the suit, it would be very difficult to be walking around in a suit if you're only like a smaller person and you have to wear 20-inch sort of fake feet on them to be walking around. So I'd imagine that would have taken a lot of sort of ingenuity and different sort of principles here to design a suit like that, sort of stuff like that. So in every way, shape, or form, this does not seem like feasible. Also, I don't believe that most human beings, even most men or women, would not have the ability to properly, unless they were hugely strong, be able to sort of get their hands into a person's mouth correctly and without the person biting down on their hands constantly to sort of get their hand out of there. But a giant great ape like that, or a giant human where the guy's 10 feet tall with hands the size of Mount Vesuvia sort of thing, yeah, he might be able to shove a finger in there or two and prop your mouth open so much that you can't even bite down on it, sort of thing like this. And then he'd be able to grasp your tongue and sort of rip it out and stuff like that. So I doubt, again, the same thing, like, I mean, that sort of stuff like that. So bears can't do that. Only a human-like sort of hand could have done that sort of thing. Okay, so here's the last photo found on the film. There was also some odd bright light photos that were shown. I didn't show them, but I mean, they just look like a bunch of round sort of bright lights. I mean, that could have been anything, starlights, some kind of optical illusion, or some bad sort of lighting effect and stuff like this. But here's clearly, sort of including the negative of it, where they went to the Kremlin and actually these were sitting in this vault for massive decades and never touched. So, I mean, this guy was the first person to actually get them to open this thing up, and because the Kremlin loosened up their rules a little bit, and he got, this fellow had hired this reporter, an absolutely 10 out of 10. If you want to see a pretty lady, this Maria there, oh my goodness, you couldn't get much nicer than that. So he was a lucky sort of researcher. They're having, I'm sure, enjoying her company along the sort of thing. But anyways, this news reporter, Maria. Tarova, it's named like that. I'm not the world's greatest with sort of stuff like that, but I certainly remember her sort of name and what she looked like. And a very nice lady and very honest looking and sort of, a decent sort to her sort of a thing. And so he was able, with her help, because she had connections and all this kind of stuff like this, to finally get this sort of organized, right? And here was the last sort of photo that was found, and there's a negative of it. Look at this. I mean, seriously, this is 1950s. These big Russian trees are pretty huge, man, okay? Now, seeing any old guerrilla movies, Mighty Joe, any kind of thing out there from very good Hollywood special effects like people and stuff like that, you would not see some of the stuff that you actually see, even though this is a really old box camera and it sadly made it quite blurry, so you can't see them that well. But here's the thing. In a normal suit, when you would put it on, you would have never had this belly down there. Do you see the belly? And it's popping out. You can see actually divots in different parts of his body where it can't be a suit. It's very, very unlikely. In any of the suits I've ever seen, the suits are uniform. You don't see these sort of muscular, like, indentations and stuff like you do in the Patterson film, or even in this one. You can actually see its back leg muscle there, the great big vein going way down and stretching and stuff like this. But it's that pot belly that fascinates me. And sort of even you can see a little bit above some part of its rib cage and stuff is pressing out a bit more on that one side, like as if something's going on there. His arms are fascinating and stuff like this. You can actually see a little bit of muscular like sort of stuff to it. And his face is fully fur covered. Much more so than typical Bigfoot in a lot of sort of areas. And I noticed this in these Almas reports, a lot of these, including even Zad herself, was very sort of furry like in the face and stuff. This would make sense in such a cold sort of climate like this. So, bottom line is that these students, just before they died, did actually really take a photograph of some kind of hairy, like sort of standing man here. Right? So whether anybody wants to call it fake or this or that, or any of this kind of stuff, it sounds insane to me that if you're a skeptic, that you're sillily sort of trying to suggest that somehow some guy either went way out there in a Bigfoot suit and sort of was able to murder all these people and sort of stuff like that, and that he had that good of a suit that he was able to walk around with no guns on him and all this kinds of weird stuff like this and these sort of stuff. And why would these students take this sort of a shot like this sort of to fake things when they were all killed, right? Like, I mean, you sort of mean like it's not feasible, but it would be very feasible if all this is true, that simply this is just another part of the piece of the evidence along with the 20 plus inch footprints, that this giant furry dude down here hunted these people down and sort of killed them. Interestingly, he may not have been like fully cannibal. He might have just not liked them in his territory and stuff like this. Another suspect that I have is, even though I don't see massive breasts on here, what if that was actually a female? But everybody sort of would, right away, the first thing I presumed was it was a great big male evil sort of Bigfoot man living in a cave that came out and killed them. But I've looked at it many times, and I thought about that either two things here. Either that this guy had some decent meal previously or whatever, right, and he has a bit of a pot on him, sort of thing like that. Or B, what if that actually was a female, and maybe she might not have as large a breast yet, or maybe they don't come out more fully until the baby's more developed or something like that. This could be possible because her stomach, or whatever this was, it kind of reminds me of that in some sort of ways like that. That would make even more sense to me why you would attack somebody and not actually eat them, because none of the victims, they just found like either their eyeballs ripped out, beaten to death, or their tongue ripped out. But if you were sort of a protective mother, as you know, I'm sure any of the ladies, if some ladies are listening to this and stuff like this, you would probably, if somebody's trying to kill your child and stuff like that, or you perceive that your child's in danger, you might clomp somebody over the head with something or do something to sort of protect your sort of thing. So what if this Sasquatch, what if she sort of found these people sort of like threatening of some sort and decided, or curiosity, and then once got near them and they're all screaming, she got pissed off and decided to kill them and follow them and kill them? Something like that. I mean, it's possible a scenario like that. So she may or he may not have been an actual cannibalistic one like we had some of the earlier reports. This guy or she might have just actually killed for some other reason, like maybe they had a sort of like some family nearby or something, and they would perceive these white people as some kind of unusual looking and a threat possibly of some sort. And maybe that's why he just ripped out the tongue or did these sort of stuff as some kind of thing like that, because I collected cattle reports from hundreds of years ago even, from around the world, of weird stories of stuff like this where their tongues are ripped out from Russia and different stuff like this. Cows, humans sometimes found this way, mysteriously dead, to horses and other sorts of creatures out there. So a giant wild man sort of thing, they sort of find this, and including apparently even ape species are known to sort of do this occasionally. And they do like sort of, Igor Borsev, he's a famous sort of scientist guy over there, and he's the most sort of renowned sort of expert on these almas and stuff like that. And he mentioned a lot in some of the reports he found of these almas doing this sort of stuff. So it even matches up with all the other sort of stories that he has in records and sort of stuff like this. So all I know is that from seeing the thing, even though this one of the documentaries I saw for it was a little bit TV-ish made, and then yes, they try and give you a bit more sort of drama to it and all that sort of stuff. But the bottom line is that the real stuff that they're showing is actually authentic and sort of stuff in that sense that, yes, the KGB admits to you that, yes, they did find these giant sort of footprints, and yes, that these people were mysteriously sort of murdered by something, and yes, these photos actually exist. So no matter what, I would say because you find giant footprints, you got pictures of them, you only have this as evidence and this picture. Right? I mean, so you can't come to another conclusion and say it was a moose. If you were a forensic expert, there's this old sort of saying, when you've eliminated the sort of everything else, then the impossible or improbable is the answer. And so even though even the most skeptical person, you have to sort of eventually sort of look at just the facts that are known. And the facts are known is that some giant sort of two-leg walking sort of thing was following around people and being able to punch them once and disintegrate their whole ribs in just with a little punch and sort of stuff like this. And the whole sort of thing, the people in fear, why they're cutting their holes in their tents to look out, all this sort of stuff cooperates 100% with this sort of photograph. If I saw that giant thing coming towards the dead too, I know I'd be very scared of it as well. Like, I mean, any sort of human being would probably be. I would love to see a sort of like one that I could stand right across the street from where he couldn't attack at me, where I could analyze him for a long period of time. In the 1970s, like I said, in the Kickapoo Creek, I saw some kind of either juvenile Sasquatch or some kind of wild ape-like sort of animal out there and stuff like that, but I couldn't see it clearly enough to really 100% know exactly what it was. But I would love to be something to investigate something like that. But this is sort of like different here, where this guy's right upon you and he's right over you. Now fear would come in. If that was a female and she was pregnant and mad, or if that was a male and he's whatever, some kind of reason, he's territorial, like gorillas can be, and that sort of stuff like this, he might react like that and actually do this sort of thing. So it makes a lot of common sense to me in a lot of ways, that actually from typical sort of other great ape-knowing behaviors and from humans, And yeah, I can only go by the facts that were found. This is the most remotest sort of place on the planet. It's not feasible that some gang went out there and sort of killed these people. You would have found other footprints. Nobody in their right mind would ever go out in these forests without guns and stuff like this, and this sort of thing. And yet this monster guy was able to kill all these people quite easily, sort of stuff like this, and walking around with no gun and these kinds of stuff. I mean, it would only be feasible if this is the real truth. And since we already seen the Lovelock Cave monster exist, well then this could be just the exact same thing. Interestingly, both the U.S. and the Russian government around this time all of a sudden started doing this Bigfoot hunting and sort of this Alma hunting. And then both of them wrote each other sort of weird letters and stuff, stating, we've stopped investigation, and then they don't mention anything more about it. Why on earth would you do that? Why such a short period of time? And let's say Russia is very different from the United States. So just because the Russian guy didn't find one in a week, why would then the U.S. guy stop at the same time roughly and stuff like that? But what if that they actually had some cooperation with each other of some sort of thing, that if they do find anything, because they knew of this Dilative sort of thing, they sort of now saw this evidence and was convinced that yes, these wild people probably exist. And what if they went out there and maybe actually one of these, either Russians or the United States, actually had captured one of these, or maybe this one, right? And then started studying it. So it could be possible that they actually sort of know of its existence. This is another sort of thing that it could be. I mean, there's a lot of people that believe in Area 51 they study Bigfoot and weird stuff like that. So I would not say that that's impossible. I find it very strange that two governments would both mysteriously all of a sudden have been interested in a so-called imaginary creature, both stopped the investigation around the same time. But what if those guys said, yeah, we found them, here's pictures and stuff like this to the FBI or whatever, they had some cooperation with each other, some weird sort of thing, and this sort of then, they now know that these are real, but you can't sort of admit it. And then let's say if scientific people are looking at this would go against their Darwinism stuff and all these weird sort of stuff, so they probably, all this stuff would be hush-hushed underground, and you would study these sort of wild people and sort of stuff like this, but never admit of their existence, knowing that other humans are going to start traversing all through the forest and shooting through every cave system, causing all kinds of chaos and stuff like that. So instead, you keep it under the hush-hush. So that's another feasibility, because I just find it a very very strange that, even if I was the government, right, and and now the Russian guys tell me 2 weeks later that no, we stopped our investigation, we can't find anything. Why would I believe that? I'd be suspicious of some other country's movement, so would I really believe them? I might be suspect that they could be lying and they really did find something, right? So, this doesn't make any sense why you would then also quit around the same time. But it would if you actually was given some secret sort of information or you were spying. So that's another feasibility is that the U.S. or the Russians were spying on each other, and when they did these investigations and saw some of this sort of evidence, and one way or the other, they don't need to now advertise that they're looking for Bigfoot anymore. They now know it's real, so they put it underground, this sort of investigation, therefore on. Right? So that's another sort of unfeasibility out there. But 100%, all you can go by is you got an old camera, there's a negative, it's never been tampered, nothing, this sort of stuff like this. So this guarantees sort of that for sure there was this image on this sort of thing here, right? And by the rest of the story that I've told you, really, it would make sense if some huge wild human of some sort was crazy looking and coming at your tent, I would be scared too, or anybody, and I'd probably try and run out of the tent too. So I mean, the same reaction of many human beings, if you didn't have a gun with you or stuff like this, would probably happen, and probably the screaming and the stuff like this might have pissed off this creature and sort of decided to do something in. Might have been at first this curiosity, who knows, but I do find that stomach is very interesting and looks possibly like somebody could be pregnant there. And if that's the case, this might have been a female. It could be that her hair, or maybe that the camera just didn't pick it up enough, even though it looks more a male-ish chest typically, some females have smaller breasts and stuff like that, or maybe more muscular or whatever. Maybe this was a female. And I mean, seriously, if it's a female and she's worried about her children and stuff like that, she might do something like that. So some of these sort of mysterious disappearances and stuff like that may not be just simply from a wild human that's cannibalistic, but also can be from fear that of their children being harmed and weird stuff like that. Local tribespeople that live around there for thousands of years, okay? Some of them were interviewed, and they had never even talked to any white people before ever and stuff like this, and been isolated for hundreds of years there, away from Russian civilization, stuff like this, and very serious, sort of down-to-earth sort of sorts there. And they call him the boss of the forest, the mink in that local area. That's what they call him. And they say that he does kill people, and they would warn their children and stuff like that, don't go out at night and don't do different sort of stuff like this, because he might come out and get you, or this sort of thing, right? So although not a popular theory, I doubt this is a theory. I see no other conclusion to it that a wild man really did kill his students. I mean, really, like, you got a guy writing you, telling you at the last minute. Who would do that? I mean, you're running out of a tent here, you're freezing to death, and you're running for your life, and if you're doing it for fake stuff to put on a show, who would really, take the time to write, but you would do that if you wanted the rest of the world to know what happened to you. I would have done the same thing. If I had a single piece of paper there and I see the guy coming and I figure I can make it in time before he can catch up to me, I would have put, help Bigfoot try to eat me or something, like some kind of thing. I could see that. I mean, it perfectly makes sense to me. The whole thing, everything it fits correctly of the regular sort of procedures people would do. Of course, now the big hairy ape lady or man is after you and they're right on top of you. Of course, you're going to try and defend yourself. And of course, this creature's probably 100 times stronger than you and wouldn't take much to sort of knock you right out or bust your ribs in from a little punch, because they're much more powerful, sort of thing like that. So again, why would you put the snowman lives there and stuff like that unless you really were truly trying to give people some kind of clue as to what happened to you? Again, the coroner saying the injury is so powerful that no human could have inflicted this sort of stuff like that, and that sort of stuff. But, and again, who would be walking around in a suit out in the way up in these giant regions like this? I mean, so what other sort of conclusion can you come from, by the evidence presented to you? So even if you don't want to believe in a big wild man, even though they exist in Lovelock Cave, and you can go look at them, the bottom line is that people have existed up to big heights. Some are very furry, and some do kill people. And so, I mean, really, I don't see why people have a problem with this as much as they do, actually, because, I mean, the wilderness areas are gigantic. I know I've been out in forests for ages when I was younger. I used to camp for weeks on end and stuff like this, and I knew how to survive out there and stuff like that. It's not sort of that sort of stuff like that, how to make fires with all kinds of stuff. When I was a kid, I used to, an old trick that just might save your life any day, so stuff like that when you're camping. If you want sort of a great way to start fires and stuff like that, go to any sort of a kid's store around, a dollar store, any of these kinds of places, and get yourself some cat's papers. And then what you do is you just take a little needle with you and some cotton batting and put them inside the sort of old film rolls and stuff like that. They're watertight and stuff like this. And what I do is I pack them in there sort of like this. I put a roll of them, a little pin, and some a flosser to put it inside of it and stuff like this, and I just make a bunch of these and things like this. And I mean, one strip would provide you many, many lights. And all you got to do is you just take a fluff of the cotton batting like this, you get your sort of tinder going and all this. So even if it's sort of red and stuff like this, you can sort of get it underneath. You try and get the best sort of stuff like this, and just all you got to do is spark this with a little needle, and instantly it will set that cotton batting on fire, and away you go, right? So, and it works. And you can also, if you want it to burn longer, you can drip it, like put it in some petroleum jelly. I tried stuff like that, different things like that, sort of like, or some of them I experimented with rubbing alcohol, and I made them in tight containers so that rubbing alcohol would stay in this sort of cloth for a while and stuff like that in the sort of the cotton batting. And that sort of thing, and so that would work. But this sort of stuff like this, so I mean, this sort of thing is that you sort of like, it's very feasible here, that sort of thing that wild humans would be able to sort of survive out there quietly in caves-like systems without our knowledge. And think about it. You're I don't know, Fred the Wino, let's say, and this guy decides to live in a cave. Well, Fred the Wino doesn't have much to do every day, right? Except go forage some stuff and stuff like this. So you would start investigating your cave pretty well and finding every sort of escape route and all this sorts of stuff that you would require sort of to be safe just in case some enemy comes like that. So because you have a little bit of a human-like intelligence, these guys probably pick the sort of best caving-like sort of areas, ones where there's multiple escape exits and sort of entrances and stuff like this, and where easily they can hide from any sort of human coming into the cave or any sort of enemy and this sorts of stuff like that. And many spelunkers have Bigfoot sort of stories where people went in these caves and all of a sudden some kind of wild man they see in there, and the guy vanished in a second, and it looked like as if there's no escape route, but there is. There's cracks and weird things in these things, and maybe lead off to another chamber and all kinds of stuff like that. So I'd imagine that these wild sort of ones, be it ape man or whatever, it wouldn't matter, they would be smart enough to figure out their terrain and where their escape routes are and sort of stuff like that. So I don't find that sort of unfeasible at all, sort of stuff like that. And also I find it amazing that here you have these indigenous tribes that have never talked to any other indigenous tribe. They don't know any sort of stuff like this, yet these guys are telling you the mink guy lives, but 500 miles away, that they've never seen these people once ever in massive hundreds of years. They tell you the Alma exists, the same sort of monster. Every person, the native groups in the different areas, wherever the caving systems are, they all tell you the same sort of story, right? And the boss of the forest, or the little guy of the forest. Some of them are smaller in some areas. But bottom line is, again, this fits possibly with this wild human to apish-like sort of thing here, where guaranteed that there is these sort of things out there. I mean, this sort of, there's so much of this, how any person can sort of deny that, especially when you can go look at some of them and actually hold them in your hand, that yes, a giant 11-foot monster guy existed, and he was covered in red hair, and he ate people, right? Well, then, I mean, you already have this, that at least one sort of one you can hold right in your hand. It very correlates with the rest of the stories worldwide and stuff like this, and also a lot of them with some kinds of evidence found or other skeletons or weird stuff like this, proving the stories are accurate. So, I mean, really, like, we have this bizarre sort of scientific mind out there where Bigfoot can't be real, but really, and a lot of these sort of stuff that they find oh, it was this or this and that. Well, of course, because it's actually, a lot of times it was a human that we're actually seeing. They're an ancient human. Not always the sort of gorilla-ish-like type. And this sort of thing is out there. And so it doesn't matter what he is, we're still seeing the same thing. Whether the guy's an ape man or an ape or a wild human, no matter what, he's 8 or 10 feet tall typically, sort of, right? Sometimes he's got a club or different stuff, and sometimes he'll kill you, and sometimes he won't, just like any other human being. But nevertheless, he exists, and there's proof of this already. So this, what I'm saying is the Bigfoot sort of mystery shouldn't be really so mysterious, because really he's already known to exist. You go look at his skeletons in Arizona, you can go see them. And so in the 1800s, in a Lovelock Cave in Nevada, there was a group of giant hairy sort of people that were up to 11 feet tall that lived in it. So obviously, if one cave can have that, probably these same stories in many other places are the same thing. They're relics sort of people that have somehow managed to stay away from us and this sort of stuff, and they're just intelligent and this sort of thing, right, like that. So, here, other interesting things, like I was talking about the U.S. government and stuff like that, sort of I've gotten ahead here a little bit. It's sorry to follow these sometimes, but I just put these out to follow so I can sort of keep along with what I wanted to talk about and stuff like this. But here, the mighty Vladimir there, I wonder if he secretly knows if the Alma's out there. Right? Like, I mean, Trudeau's extremely jealous of Vladimir. Like, I mean, look at Vladimir. I mean, this guy's got the skill. He can sing Blueberry Hill like nobody else. He can play piano. He's full of machismo, sort of stuff like this, and he can handle his vodka. Right? All the opposite of what Trudeau can do. Sort of stuff like this. So I mean, he's. I'm sure even he might actually have some possible knowledge of these sorts of stuff like this. He's a fascinating sort of interesting character, for sure, and he loves to fish like myself and stuff like this. So I think I'd get along with him quite well. He sort of looks like an entertaining sort of a fellow, but nevertheless, that sort of thing like that. But I wonder if secretly, sort of like, you know what I mean, when they did these sort of stuff in this KGB, when they first went on the scene and all this weird stuff, since they fully well know now that they see the giant prints, and they actually sort of went around the region and maybe went there with sort of wild equipment and actually killed one of these things or caught them, they may actually know this. And so it's possible that even this is just kept secretly, sort of stuff like this. If you think that's doubtful, even our own governments sort of do this. There's like this book that's made out for forest rangers all the time, okay? And inside of it, it actually has a whole section about what the forest ranger or any of the sort of workers of the forestry in the national park should do if they see a Bigfoot, how to be careful, what to avoid, and all this kinds of stuff. Who would spend gazillions of bucks here to put in information of something that doesn't exist? Governments are well known to sort of keep away a lot of facts from us and stuff like this. Like, there's massive, if you think, like, everybody thinks Donald Trump makes some decisions. This is not the case at all. There's agencies way above these people, massive hidden ones, where this is where our government money vanishes to. So, like, let's say the budget is like, 100 billion or whatever, right, for a certain sort of thing like this. You'll notice that armies, governments, like, as a for instance, like the army will pay $400 or $500 for a bolt, the same bolt that you could buy at Walmart for 4 cents, from even the same sorts of people sometimes. The reason they do this is probably a lot of this money is then filtered to support these secret sort of agencies that exist amongst us. Everything from possibly Men in Black to who knows, whatever the top sort of stuff. So there's people sort of above these sort of stuff like this, and these secret agencies exist, guaranteed, and they may have sort of knowledge on this sort of stuff, because it could be that they actually know that they exist, these wild people and stuff like this, but for many reasons don't want their citizens running through the forest, shooting at everything moving. They don't want to, it also argues a little bit with these sort of evolutionist sort of stuff, and they do a lot of funding for that sort of stuff, anything sort of non-God, like a government's going to like that sort of stuff. So any of these sorts of stuff would be many, many reasons why you wouldn't sort of admit to the public that such a thing existed, sort of for a multitude of reasons, sort of thing like that. So I wouldn't be doubt that they actually, after these kids have been killed, I wouldn't doubt that this Russian group went out there and possibly found this thing and actually sort of then stopped the investigation quickly, because they don't need to investigate anymore. They may be investigating privately thereafter, but they're told, there's a bunch of government notes you can actually find in different countries where they actually tell them to tell you this. So if somebody goes in for a Bigfoot and stuff like this, or any of this kind of stuff, they're always told to sort of like, just, no matter what, it's imaginary, just tell them that. That is your answer. There is no other answer. So that's interesting that it's normal government policies to even do such things. Other interesting things is that thousands of people some years actually vanish in our USA national parks. And not including the world. I'm sure around the world there's probably way more. Some have Bigfoot-like things to them. One interesting tale of a possible Sasquatch, a wild man cause of a vanishing, was these workers were checking along a fence line for some kind of leak. And as they were walking right behind each other, there was a fence going into the forest that was a little bit over 8 feet tall on the right-hand side of them, and they're right beside each other, so each guy is only like about a foot behind each other. All of a sudden, when one did not respond a few times, they then turned around and found the guy had vanished. So they start walking back a few feet here and stuff like this, and then they found a spot along the fence where it looked like some giant had reached over and actually grabbed the guy and lifted him with one arm right over the fence and vanished. So whoever this was so tall that without even making a peep, they were able to be over the top of this 8-foot fence, reach their giant arm down while the guy was walking by, put their mouth around his hand, and lift this guy up like a ragamuffin without him even making a sort of a scream, and get him on the other side. They found then that this thing had actually ripped off this guy's clothing or whatever. Some of his clothing was found torn and stuff like this. So maybe he was actually raped of some sort or whatever, right? Because men have been actually captured as well in the past. So maybe it was a female Bigfoot, and unfortunately the guy might have looked like Trudeau or something like that, and so she was leaping out in the forest a bit too excited. But all kidding aside though, seriously, it's a very sad thing, and I feel so sorry for these people. Like, I mean, can you imagine you're walking with your worker and all of a sudden, yeah, Joe, get me the beer or something like this, and the guy was right behind you 1 second before, and you turn your head, and I mean, either of those guys could have gotten it too. It just happened that whoever it was, this monster thing that was hanging over this fence, was actually waited for the right opportunity and grabbed this person. And this sort of, you find these stories all through these national forests all the time, where the last known record of the person, there was 4 or 5 in a row, they're walking up the pathway, they're right beside each other, and Betty says to Barney, "Hey Barney," and then all of a sudden the guy's gone. And sometimes they don't even find any sort of tracing along the bush on either side that somebody was dragged in or moved. Because what if the giant is actually standing above the bush line, and just like in this event, reaches down and actually just puts her hand around the person's mouth quickly, lifts them up, or snaps her neck or whatever, right? Or takes them and sort of captures them and now starts mating with them. Whatever the case, it wouldn't matter how they're doing it. Point is that they would have the ability to do that, and a Sasquatch is quite a large sort of typically size here, so they would have the possibility that actually his hand would be big enough to easily go over your mouth and sort of shut you up quickly and lift you up, no problem. Sort of thing like this. Like I said, the gorillas and stuff, there's been tests on even gorillas, and they're 10 times stronger than a human. And even chimps and stuff like that. So the same thing would apply to a wild giant ape man of some sort, right? Probably with the size that they are and this sort of stuff like that, they're probably much stronger mass sort of ratio to them and this sort of thing. And so this would then make sort of a possibility that a lot of these sort of people that maybe are vanishing in the forests that we think is some other sort of thing, this is why you don't find their body and weird stuff like this. So if the person disappeared in this one little area, because if you're a giant human, you'd be able to pick them up, you'd walk with them to your cave, maybe that's a couple of miles away and stuff like this, you're never going to be seen again. Or that you kill them eventually or whatever, but now they find the body way further up in some kind of thing. There's been quite a few children like this, sadly, where they found sort of it was strange. There was one incident where it looked like as if somehow somebody had taken the child and chucked them over sort of like a massive distance over a cliff where no human could throw a human that far. But the child was found to have such damage that he actually seemed to have fallen from the sky. So one of the theories was that either a giant thunderbird of some sort grabbed this kid and flew off with him and dropped him, or that somehow possibly some kind of wild sort of a thing like this was the sort of responsibility. But the thing is that these sort of things exist quite sort of frequently, right? Where a lot of people are vanishing. There was I never was able to see the whole article sort of thing, but the Forest City newspaper said that this Bigfoot had grabbed these kids. And they found blood up this tree there where apparently the Bigfoot had smashed it and sort of obliterated these sort of the children into oblivion, smashed them to pieces, bashing them sort of into the tree and stuff like this. I didn't see the whole article of it, so I don't know the whole sort of thing of it, but I just caught a portion of it. And sadly, I haven't been able to find the original sort of news story for it and sort of stuff like that. But this sort of thing like this. But the bottom line here with this sort of stuff is that you can see here that what I'm showing you and sort of stuff like this, including even wild people that actually have been looked upon even by scientists and even sort of were in hospitals even. There was this story about over in China, this lady was raped by a Yuran, and her son is alive. He's 7 foot something on him, a giant monster and stuff. But he inherited sort of more of the Asian sort of genes instead of the wild mannish, except some parts of them did. Where he's gigantic, his arms are like a Sasquatch, so much longer than any other known human beings, sort of like per ratio, sort of stuff like that. The same with the feet and the stuff. There was another wild guy, the same thing, where the mother had claimed she was raped by some wild man in a cave, sort of idea. And this guy actually was the island area got so small that he had no place to hide anymore much, so he lived around a small set of trees and started getting more used to humans and stuff like this. This guy was 7 foot something, completely covered with hair. He had big feet, sort of all this stuff. He squeaked and growled and whined exactly like the Chinese emperor, even thousands of years ago, describes these yellow people doing, and many other sort of European stories and stuff like this. When they captured these wild people, that's all they could do was growl and sort of make sounds like that. So matches exactly what they do. This guy lives up in trees, and he would sort of chew on leaves and stuff like that. So again, some of them are sort of more vegetarian-like, but others sort of are cannibalistic, just like humans, right? Sort of in the typical sense. But this guy actually, there's photographs of him. He was in hospitals and stuff like that, and he 100% was a wild man that was supposedly born of just like the Xana sort of stuff. So we actually have records of these sorts of things laying around where already these sort of like wild people are proven to exist, where yes, some guy 7 foot something was covered with fur hair and giant feet, lives in trees and eats leaves and goes ooh, 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 exists. So again, sort of like, I mean, this skeptical sort of stuff about it is ridiculous, because obviously these people aren't sort of looking at the factual stuff here. I mean, you can't deny this. I mean, the guy was in the hospitals even. They had all kinds of photographs of him, tests done on him, and different weird stuff like this. Even though he was sort of, he couldn't speak to people and stuff like that, he became sort of used to people, and they would sort of be able to teach him small little things, come along, walk with us and stuff like that, and that sort of stuff. So, I mean, it's 100% sort of like, already, again, as I'm sort of showing you here, that there is real evidence of these sort of giant people, and a lot of them do walk